The gravel crunching under the tyres of my truck was a sound I usually loved. It was the sound of my driveway, back home. It was the sound of work, of honesty, of a day well spent in the garden. But here, on the long, winding driveway of Oakhaven, the sound seemed out of place. It was too loud, too rough. It was an intrusion on the perfect silence of my family's estate. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My hands were calloused. There was a bit of dirt under my fingernail that I had missed, despite scrubbing them for 10 minutes before I left my cottage. I looked at that speck of dirt and smiled. That dirt was real. The manicured hedges passing by my window, cut into perfect geometric shapes, felt like a lie. Oakhaven. The name used to sound like a sanctuary to me when I was a little girl. Now it sounded like a courtroom where I was always the defendant and the verdict was always guilty. Guilty of being simple, guilty of not wanting more, guilty of surviving my husband, Tom, without turning into a bitter, money-hungry socialite. I pulled up to the front of the main house. The mansion loomed over me, casting a long shadow across the circular driveway. It was a beautiful beast of stone and ivy, built by my great-grandfather. It was meant to house generations of love. Instead, it mostly housed resentment and expensive furniture that no one was allowed to sit on. 2 cars were already there. Of course they were. Robert's black sedan was gleaming in the late afternoon sun. It was brand new. I didn't know the make, but I knew it cost more than my entire house. Next to it was Sarah's convertible, bright red, screaming for attention even when the engine was off. And then there was my truck, a faded blue Ford, 15 years old, with a dent in the rear bumper from where I backed into a fence post last winter. I parked it right between them. I didn't do it to be petty. I did it because it was the only space left, but I knew Robert would see it as an act of war. I took a deep breath. Just 3 hours, Linda, I whispered to myself. 3 hours for Dad. You can do this. Keep your head down. Don't engage. Eat the dry chicken, nod at their stories, and go home to your dog. I opened the door and stepped out. The air here smelled different. It didn't smell like rain and soil. It smelled of old money and cedar mulch. Before I could even reach the grand oak doors, they swung open. Robert stood there. He was wearing a suit that fit him too perfectly. His hair was silver, styled back, and he held a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked like the cover of a business magazine, which was exactly what he wanted. Linda, he said. His voice was smooth, deep, and completely devoid of warmth. He didn't step out to hug me. He just stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance like a bouncer at a club I wasn't cool enough to get into. "Hello, Robert," I said, walking up the stone steps. I was wearing my best dress. It was a simple floral print I had bought at a department store 3 years ago. It was clean, it was pressed, but under Robert's gaze I felt like I was wearing a burlap sack. He looked past me, his eyes locking onto my truck. He winced as if he had just seen a dead animal on his porch. "Did you have to park that thing right in the front?" he asked, taking a sip of his drink. "I have potential investors coming by later this week. I don't want oil stains on the cobblestones." "It doesn't leak, Robert," I said, keeping my voice steady, "and it got me here. Barely, I assume," he muttered, finally stepping aside to let me in. The foyer was cold. It was always cold. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that was supposed to preserve the artwork, not comfort the humans living there. My heels clicked loudly on the marble floor. The sound echoed up to the high ceiling, bouncing off the crystal chandelier that was worth more than a college education. "Sarah is in the drawing room," Robert said, walking ahead of me. He didn't offer to take my coat. He didn't ask how I was. He just expected me to follow. I followed. Sarah was standing by the fireplace, looking at her phone. She didn't look up when we entered. She was typing furiously. Her long, manicured nails clicking against the screen. She was wearing a silk dress that looked like flowing water. She looked beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way. "She's here," Robert announced. Sarah finished her text, hit send, and then finally looked at me. Her eyes did a quick scan, head to toe, up and down. The assessment took less than a second, and the judgment was clear. "Oh, Linda," she sighed. It wasn't a greeting, it was a disappointment. "You wore the floral thing again. Didn't you wear that to Easter 2 years ago?" "It's a good dress, Sarah," I said. "Hello to you too." She walked over and gave me an air kiss near my right cheek. Her skin didn't touch mine. She smelled of expensive perfume, something floral and chemical that made my nose itch. "We were just talking about you," Sarah said, walking back to her glass of wine. "Robert thinks you should sell that little plot of land you have. The market is crashing, you know. You're going to lose everything if you're not careful." I almost laughed. The market wasn't crashing. The real estate sector in our county was booming. I knew this because I read the financial reports every morning with my coffee. I knew this because the investment firm I secretly owned shares in had just released their quarterly earnings, but to them, I was just Linda the gardener. Linda, who barely scraped by. "I'm fine, Sarah," I said softly. "The house is paid for. I have enough to eat. I don't need much." Robert scoffed. He was pouring himself another drink. I noticed his hand was shaking slightly, just a tiny tremor. If I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. "That's your problem, Linda," Robert said, his back to me. "You have no ambition. You're content with scraps. Dad built an empire. He gave us a legacy. And you're happy growing tomatoes and living like a peasant." "There is dignity in growing your own food, Robert," I replied. "There is dirt," he shot back, turning around. His face was flushed. "There is just dirt. Look at you. You're 55 years old. You look 10 years older. If Tom, God rest his soul, had left you with anything substantial, maybe you could take care of yourself. But no. He was a dreamer too. 2 dreamers, broke and happy." He said happy like it was a dirty word. I thought of Tom. I thought of the nights we spent looking at spreadsheets, not just stars. Tom wasn't just a dreamer. He was a genius. He saw the future of tech before anyone else in this town. When he died, he didn't leave me with debt. He left me with a portfolio that could buy this entire neighborhood. But Tom also made me promise, "Don't let the money change you, Lynn, and don't let them love you for it. If they can't love you poor, they don't deserve you rich." So I stayed silent. I let Robert believe what he needed to believe. "Let's just eat," Sarah said, checking her reflection in the mirror over the mantel. "I have a live stream at 8. I can't be late. My followers get anxious." We moved to the dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20 people, but it was set for 3. We sat at one end, clustered together, but miles apart emotionally. The housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, brought out the soup. She was the only warm thing in this house. She gave me a small, secret smile as she placed the bowl in front of me. I smiled back. That small exchange was the most genuine human interaction I had experienced since I arrived. "So," Robert started, spooning his soup aggressively, "we have some business to discuss after dinner." My stomach tightened. There was always business. Usually it was them telling me I was embarrassing the family name. "Can we just enjoy the meal for Dad's anniversary?" I asked. "We're supposed to be remembering him." "We are remembering him," Sarah said, breaking a piece of bread. "We are remembering that he wanted this family to be prominent, successful." She pointed a breadstick at me. "Which brings me to my point. Linda, I was cleaning out my closet last week. I have 3 bags of clothes, designer, barely worn. Some still have tags. I was going to send them to the charity shop, but I thought, well, you could use them." I put my spoon down. The metal clinked against the china. I don't need your old clothes, Sarah, I said. Don't be proud, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. It's embarrassing, Linda. People talk. I saw Mrs. Gable at the club the other day, and she asked if you were working as a maid now. She saw you at the grocery store in your work boots. I was buying fertilizer, I said, and Mrs. Gable has cataracts. She probably couldn't see who I was. It reflects on us. Robert slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Don't you get it? You are a reflection of this family. When you look like a pauper, people think the Oakhaven line is failing. Is it? I asked. The question hung in the air. Robert froze. His eyes narrowed. What did you say? Is the line failing? I repeated, looking him straight in the eye. Because you seem very concerned about appearances, Robert. Usually, people who shout the loudest about being rich are the ones worrying about the bill. For a second, I thought he might throw his wineglass at me. His jaw worked, grinding his teeth. The vein in his forehead pulsed. How dare you, he whispered. I carry this family. I manage the properties. I deal with the taxes, the upkeep, the lawyers. I keep the roof over this legacy. And you dare to question my stability. I'm just saying, I'm happy with my life, I said calmly. I don't need your clothes, Sarah, and I don't need your lectures, Robert. I came here to honour Dad. Can we please just do that? The rest of the dinner was a blur of silence and the scraping of forks. I could feel their anger radiating across the table. It was a physical heat. They hated me, not because I was bad to them, but because I was a mirror they didn't want to look into. My simplicity made their extravagance look desperate. When the main course was cleared, Sarah signalled to Mrs. Higgins. Bring the box, Sarah ordered. Mrs. Higgins looked uncomfortable. She walked to the corner of the room and picked up a large cardboard box. She brought it over to me, her eyes apologising silently. Happy anniversary, Sarah said, swirling her wine. Since we aren't exchanging gifts, consider this charity. I looked into the box. It was a mess of bright colours, sequins and silk. It was clothes that would look ridiculous on a woman who spent her days in a garden. It was a costume box for a clown. I told you I didn't want this, I said. Just take it, Robert snapped. Sell them if you have to. God knows you probably need the cash to fix that truck. I stood up. I couldn't do it anymore. The air in the room was suffocating. I'm going to get some air, I said. Sit down, Linda, Robert commanded. We aren't done. I am, I said. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and out the back door onto the terrace. The night air hit me like a blessing. It was cool and crisp. I walked to the edge of the stone railing and looked out over the gardens. They were overgrown in the back. The expertly manicured hedges in the front were just a facade. Here, in the shadows, the weeds were creeping in. The fountain was dry. There was a crack in the stone path that hadn't been there last year. Robert was right about one thing. He was managing the property, but he wasn't maintaining it. He was holding it together with duct tape and prayers. I closed my eyes and thought of Tom. I remembered the day we bought our little cottage. It was a wreck. The roof leaked. The floors were rot. Robert had laughed when he saw it. He called it a hovel, but Tom had taken my hand, stood in the middle of the empty, dusty living room and said, This is a castle, Linda. You know why? Because we own it. It doesn't own us. We will sleep soundly here. And we did. We slept like babies. Inside Oakhaven, I knew Robert didn't sleep. I could see it in the dark circles under his eyes that the makeup couldn't hide. I could hear it in the desperation of his voice. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet pouch. Inside was a seed, just a single acorn I had picked up from the ground the day Tom was buried. He loved oaks. He said they were slow, but they were sure. They didn't rush to the sky. They built their roots first. I miss you, Tom. I whispered into the darkness. They are eating each other alive in there, and they want to eat me too. The glass door behind me slid open. I didn't turn around. I knew the heavy footsteps. Stop being dramatic, Linda. Robert's voice came from the shadows. Come back inside. We need to talk about the house. I thought we talked about the house, I said, still looking at the dark garden. Not that house, he said. This house. Oakhaven. I turned around slowly. Robert was leaning against the door frame. He looked tired. The arrogance was still there, but it was thinner now, like a coat of paint that was peeling. What about Oakhaven? I asked. The roof needs repairs, he said. He looked away, avoiding my eyes. The slate is cracking, and the foundation on the east wing is settling. It's expensive work. And, he paused, taking a sip of his drink. Since you are a co-owner, technically, even though you contribute nothing, we need to discuss how to handle the costs. I don't have money, remember, I said, using their own lie against them. I'm just a poor widow with a rusty truck. Robert grit his teeth. We know that. We aren't asking for your money, Linda. We know you don't have it. But there are papers, administrative things. If we want to get a loan for the repairs or restructure the estate management, we need all signatures. It's a formality. A formality, I repeated. Yes, just paperwork. To keep the legacy alive, unless you want the roof to collapse on Dad's library. He was guilt-tripping me. It was a classic Robert move. I'll look at the papers, I said. Good, he said, pushing off the door frame. We'll go over them after dessert. Don't run off. He went back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. The noise of the house drifted out, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the low murmur of the TV that Sarah had turned on. I stood there in the cold, clutching the acorn in my hand. My heart was beating a little faster. Tom had taught me about business too. Cha-ching. He taught me that when someone says it's just a formality, it's never just a formality. It's usually a trap. Robert and Sarah thought I was simple. They thought my silence was stupidity. They thought my lack of designer clothes meant a lack of intelligence. They were about to find out that the quietest person in the room is often the one who hears the most. I put the acorn back in my pocket. I smoothed down my floral dress. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, filling my lungs with the truth of who I was. Then I turned and walked back into the lion's den. I didn't go straight back to the dining room. I needed a moment. The air outside had been crisp, but inside the house felt heavy again, like a wool blanket soaked in water. I told myself I was going to the powder room, the small guest bathroom tucked away under the main staircase. It was a lie I told to the empty hallway. I walked softly. I've always walked softly. Tom used to say I moved like a cat, quiet and deliberate. It was a habit from years of gardening, of trying not to startle the birds or crush a new sprout. Tonight, that habit was about to serve a different purpose. As I passed the library, Dad's old sanctuary, I heard a voice. It wasn't the polite, passive-aggressive voice Robert used at the dinner table. It was a jagged, panicked sound. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Just a crack. A sliver of golden light spilled out onto the Persian rug in the hallway. I stopped. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have kept walking, used the restroom, and gone back to eat my dessert. But something in the tone of Robert's voice froze my feet to the floor. It's not enough, Sarah. I moved the funds from the chaotic account to the operating account, and the bank still froze it. So unfreeze it. Sarah's voice was shrill, lacking her usual social media composure. Call the manager. You play golf with him. I can't call him because I owe him personal favours I can't repay, Robert hissed. There was the sound of a hand slapping a desk. We are underwater. We aren't just sinking. We are at the bottom of the ocean, looking up at the boat. I pressed myself against the wall, into the shadows between a marble bust of Caesar and a tall potted fern. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Underwater? Oakhaven. How much time do we have? Sarah asked. Her voice was trembling now. The foreclosure notice gives us 7 days, Robert said. The word hit me like a physical blow. Foreclosure. The word didn't belong here. This was Oakhaven. This was the fortress. 7 days, Sarah shrieked, then lowered her voice to a frantic whisper. My friends will see it. It will be in the public records. Oh my God, Robert. If the tabloids find out the Oakhaven estate is being repossessed, I'm ruined. My brand deals. Everything. Forget your damn brand deals, Robert snapped. We lose the house. We lose the legacy. Unless... There was a pause. A heavy, pregnant silence. Unless she signs, Sarah said. I held my breath. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't say it. Please, don't say it. She has to, Robert said. His voice changed. It became cold, calculating. We need all 3 signatures to leverage the equity. If we can restructure the deed, take out a bridge loan against the full value of the property, including the land, we can pay off the immediate debt. We buy ourselves 6 months, maybe a year. But she won't sign a mortgage, Sarah said. She's simple, Robert, but she's scared of debt. She lives in a shack because she's afraid of bills. She won't know it's a mortgage, Robert replied. I opened my eyes. I stared at the wallpaper, a damask pattern of vines and flowers. It suddenly looked like a cage. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I had the lawyers draw up a maintenance agreement, Robert explained. I could hear the rustle of papers. It looks like a standard contract for approving the roof repairs and foundation work. A lot of legal jargon about liability distribution and asset management. Buried in the appendix, on page 42, is a clause that grants power of attorney to the executor, me, for financial restructuring regarding the property. You're going to trick her? Sarah asked. There was no moral outrage in her voice, just curiosity. I'm going to save us, Robert corrected her. She doesn't read, Sarah. Not really. She reads seed packets and grocery receipts. You saw her tonight. She's wearing a dress from a discount rack. She has no idea how the real world works. She'll see a stack of papers, get overwhelmed, and sign just to get out of here. She is desperate for approval, Sarah added, her voice gaining confidence. If we tell her this is how she helps the family, if we tell her this makes her a real part of the legacy, she'll do it. Exactly, Robert said. We play nice. We offer her some coffee. We talk about Dad. We make her feel included. Shoot. Then we slide the paper across the desk. She signs. We save the house. And she goes back to her little garden. None the wiser. A tear slipped out of my eye and ran down my cheek. It was hot and angry. It wasn't the theft that hurt. I had money. If they had come to me honestly and said, Linda, we messed up. We are drowning. Please help us. I would have written a check that night. I would have bailed them out because they are my blood. Because Dad would have wanted me to. But they didn't want my help. They wanted my ignorance. They wanted to exploit the very thing they mocked me for. They thought my simplicity was stupidity. They thought my kindness was weakness. I wiped the tear away with the back of my hand. The skin felt rough against my face. She doesn't read. I almost laughed out loud. I thought of the nights after Tom died. I couldn't sleep in our big bed alone, so I sat in his office. I read every book on his shelf. I read The Intelligent Investor. I read books on contract law. I read about trust funds, tax shelters, and limited liability corporations. I didn't do it for money. I did it because it felt like I was still talking to him. I learned the language of the wolves. so the sheep wouldn't get eaten. I wasn't a sheep. Not anymore. I stepped away from the door. I walked silently backward down the hall, my heels hovering an inch off the floor until I reached the carpet of the living room. Then I turned and walked back toward the dining room, making sure my steps were loud and clumsy. "Is anyone there?" I called out, forcing a tremble into my voice. "I think I got lost looking for the bathroom." The library door flew open. Robert stepped out. He smoothed his tie. A fake smile plastered instantly onto his face. It was terrifying how fast the mask came down. "Linda!" he exclaimed. "There you are. We were just looking for some old photos in the library. Come in." Sarah appeared behind him. She looked flushed, but she managed a tight smile. "Yes, come in, sister. We have coffee." I walked into the lion's den. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a rolling ladder, a massive mahogany desk that dominated the center of the room. The air smelled of old paper and leather. It was a smell I used to love. Now it smelled like a trap. On the desk there was a stack of documents. It was thick, at least 50 pages. Beside it lay a heavy, expensive fountain pen. "Sit down, Linda," Robert said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite the desk. He sat in Dad's high-backed chair. He looked small in it. Sarah sat on the edge of the desk, crossing her legs. She was playing the role of the supportive sister now. "We were talking," Robert began, clasping his hands on the desk, "about what you said earlier, about dignity." "Oh," I said, sitting down. I clutched my purse in my lap, playing the nervous widow. "Yes," Robert nodded solemnly. "You were right. We have been harsh. We're stressed, Linda. This house, it's a beast to manage, but it's our beast, and we want you to be part of the solution. We want you to feel like an owner." "That sounds nice," I said softly. "It is," Sarah chimed in. "We want to do these repairs, the roof, the foundation. It's for the future, for the next generation." She didn't mention that neither of them had children. I was the only one who had thought about children, but that dream died with Tom. "So," Robert slid the stack of papers toward me. "This is just the standard contractor agreement and the authorization for the work. Since your name is on the deed, we need your signature. It's just to say you agree that we should fix the roof." "It's very thick," I said, staring at the pile. "Oh, lawyers," Robert laughed, a hollow, dry sound. "They charge by the page, I think. It's mostly definitions. What is a roof? What is a nail? You know how it is." "I see," I said. I reached out and touched the paper. It was high-quality bond paper. Heavy, permanent. "Do you want me to sign it now?" I asked. "Ideally," Robert said, uncapping the pen. He held it out to me. The gold nib glinted under the desk lamp. "So we can get the contractors started on Monday. We don't want the rain to get in, do we?" I took the pen. It felt cold in my hand. I looked at Robert. He was leaning forward, his eyes wide, his breathing shallow. He was watching the pen like a starving dog watches a bone. Sarah was biting her lip, her eyes darting between me and the document. They were terrified. I held the pen over the paper. I saw their shoulders relax, just a fraction. They thought they had won. "I need my reading glasses," I said, putting the pen down. "Oh," Robert blinked. "Do you have them?" "In my truck," I said. "But, well, the light in here is a bit dim, and Tom always told me—" I paused, letting the name hang in the air. "What?" Robert asked impatiently. "What did Tom say?" "He said never sign anything you haven't read twice," I said. "I'm a slow reader, Robert. You know that. I didn't go to business school like you." "Linda, it's really just standard boilerplate," Robert said, his voice tightening. We don't have all night. Sarah has her stream. It will only take me a minute to look through, I said. I picked up the heavy document. I'll just skim it. I opened the first page. Agreement for property maintenance and asset utilization. It looked boring. It was designed to look boring. The font was small. The paragraphs were dense blocks of grey text. I flipped the page, then another. I saw Robert tapping his foot. Page 5, Robert said helpfully. That's where the contractor scope is. I ignored him. I flipped through the middle section. I was looking for keywords. Lien, encumbrance, power of attorney. Linda, really? Sarah sighed. This is ridiculous. Just sign the damn thing. Sarah, Robert scolded her, then turned a forced smile back to me. She's just tired, Linda. Take your time. But the last page is where the signature line is. I kept flipping. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I had spent years pruning rose bushes. I knew how to handle thorns without shaking. I stopped at page 42. There it was, paragraph 14, subsection C. The undersigned hereby grants full power of attorney to the primary executor, Robert J. Sterling, to execute any and all financial instruments, including but not limited to refinancing, mortgaging, or leveraging the property known as Oakhaven Estate for the purpose of debt consolidation and operational liquidity. It wasn't a maintenance contract. It was a blank check. It gave Robert the power to mortgage the house, to pay off his own debts, and when he inevitably defaulted because he was bad with money, the bank would take the house, my share included. I read it twice, just to be sure. Then I closed the folder. I looked up. Robert was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. Did you find the roof part? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. I found a lot of things, I said. I picked up the pen again. Robert leaned in, his eyes hungry. Here, I asked, pointing to the line. Yes, right there, he breathed. Just a simple signature. I brought the pen tip to the paper. I could feel the electricity in the room. This was it, the moment they secured their survival and my destruction. Then I stopped. I pulled the pen back. Actually, I said, my voice dropping an octave, I don't think I can sign this. The silence that followed was absolute. The clock on the mantel ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. What? Robert whispered. I can't sign it, I repeated. I pushed the document back across the desk toward him. Why not? Sarah demanded, jumping off the desk. It's for the roof, Linda. Do you want the house to rot? The house isn't rotting, Sarah, I said calmly, but something else is. I stood up. I saw the panic flare in Robert's eyes. He stood up too, towering over me, trying to use his height to intimidate. Sit down, Linda, he growled. The mask was gone completely now. Sign the paper. No, I said. You selfish little... Sarah started, stepping toward me. I know, I said, cutting her off. I looked at Robert. I know about the bank, Robert. I know about the freeze on your accounts. I know about the foreclosure notice. Robert's face went white. All the blood drained from it, leaving him looking like a wax figure. You... How? He stammered. The walls are thin, I lied, and you are loud. You were spying on us, Sarah accused, pointing a manicured finger at my face. I was listening, I corrected. There is a difference, and I read page 42, Robert. Operational liquidity. That's not a roof repair, that's a bailout. Robert slumped back into his chair. He looked defeated. He covered his face with his hands. We're going to lose it, he mumbled into his palms. We're going to lose everything. Sarah started to cry. It wasn't a pretty movie star cry. It was an ugly, gasping sob. I can't be poor, Linda. I can't. I don't know how to do anything. I stood there, looking at them. My powerful, arrogant siblings, reduced to weeping children because the toys were being taken away. I could have walked out. I could have gotten in my truck, driven home, and let the bank take the house. I would have been fine. I had my cottage. I had my investments. I didn't need Oakhaven. But this was my father's house. This was my history too. And more than that, looking at them, I realized something. They were broken. They were hollow. And leaving them to crash and burn wouldn't fix them. It would just destroy them. Tom wouldn't want that. He believed in redemption. He believed people could learn, even if the lesson had to be painful. I won't sign that paper, I said clearly. Robert looked up. His eyes were red. Shit, then it's over. Get out. Just get out. I won't sign that paper, I repeated, but I didn't say I wouldn't help. Robert froze. Sarah stopped crying, sniffing loudly. What? Robert asked. You don't have any money. I have enough, I said. I can help you. I can stop the foreclosure. How? Sarah asked, wiping her mascara-stained eyes. You grow vegetables. Let's just say I've had a good harvest, I said. But... I paused. I needed this to land. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark grounds. But what? Robert asked. He sounded desperate. He was ready to grab at any lifeline, even one thrown by his gardener sister. I turned back to face them. But I have conditions, I said. Real conditions, not fine print hidden on page 42. Anything, Robert said. I'll give you a larger share of the inheritance. I'll give you the antique collection. I don't want your things, Robert, I said. I want your dignity. They stared at me, confused. If I save this house, I said, my voice steady and hard as granite, things are going to change. No more secrets, no more insults, and there will be a price to pay. A public price. What kind of price, Sarah whispered. I looked at them both, savouring the moment. The balance of power had shifted. The gravity in the room had moved. It was no longer centred on Robert's desk. It was centred on me. We'll discuss the details tomorrow, I said. But know this. If I sign, I'm not signing as your little sister. I am signing as the one in charge. I picked up my purse. Good night, Robert. Good night, Sarah. Try to get some sleep. You look terrible. I turned and walked out of the library. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, confused, terrified, and for the first time in their lives, respectful. I drove home in silence. The only sound was the hum of the tyres on the asphalt and the wind whistling through a crack in the window seal. My hands were gripping the wheel, not out of anger anymore, but out of resolve. I had thrown a stone into the stagnant pond of my family's life, and the ripples were just beginning. My cottage was waiting for me. It sat at the end of a dirt lane, tucked behind a row of weeping willows. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled of dried herbs, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace. As I pulled up, the porch light flickered on. Buster, my golden retriever mix, was already at the door, his tail thumping a rhythm against the wood. "Hey, buddy," I whispered as I unlocked the door. He greeted me with a low whine and a nudge of his wet nose. I knelt down and buried my face in his fur. He smelled like grass and rain. He didn't care about my bank account. He didn't care about my clothes. He just cared that I was home. "They're in trouble, Buster," I told him, walking into the kitchen to put the kettle on. "Big trouble." I sat at my small kitchen table. It was made of pine, scarred from years of use. In the corner of the room stood a small, unassuming filing cabinet. To anyone visiting, it looked like where I kept my utility bills and recipes. I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside, there were no seed packets. There were binders, neat, labelled binders. I pulled out the one marked Liquid Assets and Market Strategy. I opened it. The numbers on the page were black and crisp. My portfolio had grown by 12% last quarter. The tech startups Tom had invested in 10 years ago were now unicorns. The real estate trusts were paying dividends that could buy a new car every month if I wanted one. I ran my finger over the total balance. It was a number with 2 commas. I wasn't just comfortable, I was wealthy. Wealthier than Robert had ever been, even at his peak. But looking at the number didn't give me a thrill. It gave me a sense of responsibility. Tom used to say, money is like water. If you hoard it, it stagnates. If you channel it, it brings life. I closed the binder. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just write them a check. If I did, they would burn through it in a year and be back to mocking me. I had to channel the water carefully. I had to wash away the rot before I could rebuild the house. The next morning, the sky was grey and heavy. A light drizzle was falling, turning the dirt lane into a slick, muddy track. I was out in the garden, wearing my rubber boots and a yellow raincoat, pulling weeds from the carrot patch. The earth was cold and wet, grounding me. Then I heard it, the sound of an engine straining. I looked up to see Robert's pristine black sedan struggling down my lane. The tyres were spinning, flinging mud onto the polished doors. He fish-tailed slightly, nearly hitting the mailbox, before coming to a halt near my truck. I didn't stop weeding. I let them come to me. The car doors opened. Robert stepped out first. He was wearing a trench coat and expensive loafers. He took one step and his foot sank 2 inches into the mud. He grimaced, looking down at his ruined shoes with horror. Sarah followed. She was holding a large umbrella, trying to shield herself from the misty rain. She looked out of place, like a flamingo in a pig pen. "Linda," Robert called out. His voice was tight. "Do you not have gravel?" "Gravel costs money," I said, pulling up a dandelion. "I'm saving up." They picked their way across the yard, dodging puddles. They looked miserable. Good. "We need to talk," Robert said when he reached the edge of the garden bed. He refused to step onto the soil. "I'm listening," I said, wiping my muddy hands on a rag hanging from my belt. "About last night," he started, then cleared his throat. We looked at the numbers again. You were right. The situation is critical." "Critical means you're bleeding out," I said, standing up. "You're not bleeding, Robert. You're already dead. The bank owns you." Sarah flinched. "Don't say that. It's the truth," I said. "I called the county clerk this morning. The foreclosure notice was filed 3 days ago. You have 48 hours before they lock the gates." Robert paled. "You called the clerk?" "I told you. I know how to read," I said. "So, why are you here? You want me to sign the maintenance agreement still?" "No," Robert said quietly. He looked down at his muddy shoes. All the fight had gone out of him. "We are here to ask, to beg, for your help. You said you could help." "I can," I said. "How?" Sarah asked, stepping closer under her umbrella. "Do you have savings, insurance money? We need $200,000 just to stop the seizure, and another 50 for the penalties." "I have it," I said simply. They both stared at me. The rain pattered against Sarah's umbrella. You have $250,000? Robert asked, disbelief warring with hope in his eyes. "In cash?" "Yes." The silence stretched. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They were recalculating everything they knew about me. Linda, the gardener. Linda, the failure. Linda, the saviour. "Okay," Robert said, letting out a long, shaky breath. "Okay. Thank God. Linda, if you give us the money, I swear I'll pay you back. I have a deal closing next month in the city. I'll give you interest, 5%. "I don't want interest," I said. 10% then," he offered quickly. "I don't want Your money, Robert, I said. I told you last night. I have conditions. What conditions? And Sarah asked. You want a room in the house. You want Mom's jewellery. I want an apology, I said. Robert blinked. An apology? Okay, I'm sorry. We're sorry. There. Done. Not like that, I shook my head. That's easy. That's cheap. I want a real apology. Publicly. Publicly? Robert frowned. What do you mean? I walked over to the porch and sat on the steps. I motioned for them to listen. Tomorrow night is Friday, I said. I want you to host a dinner at Oakhaven. A formal dinner. Best china. Best wine. We can't afford a dinner party, Sarah cried. I'll pay for the catering, I said. But you have to invite the guests. I want you to invite Aunt Margaret, the Johnsons, the Price family, and especially Mrs. Gable. The gossips, Sarah gasped. Why them? Because those are the people you told that I was a failure, I said. Those are the people who look at me with pity because of the stories you spun. I want them all there. And then? Robert asked warily. And then, I continued, before dessert is served, I want you both to stand up. I want you to look them in the eye, and I want you to apologize to me for every specific insult, for calling me a peasant, for mocking my truck, for saying Tom was a loser, for trying to trick me into signing away my rights. You want us to humiliate ourselves. Robert's face flushed red, in front of the whole town. I want you to tell the truth, I corrected him. You've spent years building a lie about who you are and who I am. I want you to tear it down. If you do that, if you really do it, I will write the check that night. I will save Oakhaven. Robert looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Robert. They were trapped. On one side, public shame. On the other, total ruin. That's cruel, Linda, Robert whispered. That's vindictive. Is it? I asked. More cruel than trying to steal your sister's inheritance by hiding a clause in her contract. More cruel than letting her walk around in rags while you drink vintage scotch. He looked away. He knew I was right. It's your choice, I said, standing up and wiping the rain from my face. You can keep your pride and lose the house, or you can swallow your pride and keep the roof over your head. You have until tonight to decide. Let me know. I turned and walked back into my cottage. I closed the door gently behind me. I watched through the curtains, and they stood in the rain for a long time. They argued. Sarah cried and stomped her foot in the mud. Robert kicked the tire of his car. Finally, they got back into the black sedan. It took them 3 tries to get the car out of the mud, the engine whining in protest. As they drove away, leaving deep ruts in my lane, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad that it had come to this, but Tom's voice was in my head, clear as a bell. Sometimes the only way to heal a bone is to break it again so it can set straight. I walked to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I had a catering company to call, and I had a check to write. I just hoped they had the courage to go through with it, because if they didn't, come Monday morning, Oakhaven would belong to the bank, and my family would be gone forever. The phone rang at 7:03 p.m. I was sitting on my porch, watching the twilight settle over the garden. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I knew who it was before I picked up. The timing was too precise. Robert didn't call early, and he didn't call late. He called exactly when he said he would, or he didn't call at all. "Hello," I answered. "We'll do it." Robert's voice sounded like it was coming through a mouthful of gravel. There was no greeting, no pleasantries, just the surrender. "You understand the terms?" I asked calmly. I watched a firefly blink into existence near the fence line. "Yes," he rasped. "Friday night, 7 o'clock. The guests you asked for." they've all accepted. And the apology? There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. It was a ragged, uneven sound. "We'll do it," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just bring the check, Linda. Please, don't make fools of us and then leave us to drown." "I keep my word, Robert," I said, "unlike some people." I hung up. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I felt a knot in my stomach. It was the same feeling I used to get when I had to prune a tree that was sick. You have to cut off the dead branches to save the trunk. It looks violent, it feels destructive, but it is the only way to ensure survival. Friday morning arrived with a sky the colour of bruised iron. I drove into town to the bank. It wasn't the big glass and steel bank where Robert had his accounts. It was a smaller, older branch on the edge of town. The kind with marble floors and tellers who knew your dog's name. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, waved me into his office immediately. He was a kind man with spectacles and a penchant for bow ties. He treated me with more respect than my own brother ever had. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, offering me a seat. "Good to see you. How is the garden?" "Thriving, thank you, Arthur," I said. "I need a certified check." "Of course. For the investment portfolio?" "No," I said, smoothing my skirt. "Personal use." $250,000. Mr. Henderson paused. He adjusted his glasses. He knew my finances better than anyone. He knew I could afford it 10 times over, but he also knew I was frugal. "That is a significant withdrawal for personal use," he said gently. "May I ask, is everything all right?" "I'm buying a house, Arthur," I lied partially. "Or rather, I'm buying a family back." He didn't pry. He typed a few commands into his computer. The printer whirred. He signed the check with a flourish and slid it across the desk in a plain white envelope. "Be careful, Linda," he said softly. "Money changes people, but it rarely changes them for the better." "I know," I said, tucking the envelope into my purse. "I'm counting on it changing them just enough." Next, I went to a boutique downtown. Not the flashy one Sarah frequented, but a quiet shop that sold quality fabrics. I bought a dress. It was navy blue, simple, with long sleeves and a high neck. It wasn't designed to show off. It was designed to command respect. It was the kind of dress a judge would wear. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun. My face had lines, yes, but they were lines of laughter and concentration, not stress and vanity. "You are not the poor relation," I told my reflection. "Tonight, you are the matriarch." I arrived at Oakhaven at 6:45 p.m. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every window glowed with golden light. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. It looked like the home of a prosperous, happy family. I parked my truck. This time, I didn't park in the middle. I parked off to the side, near the rose garden. I didn't need to block their view to make a point anymore. I carried the white envelope in my clutch bag. It felt heavier than a brick. Robert met me at the door. He looked terrible. He was wearing a tuxedo, but he looked like he had shrunk inside it. His skin was grey and his eyes were bloodshot. He smelled of mouthwash and fear. "They're arriving in 10 minutes, he said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. "Is everything prepared?" I asked. "The catering is in the kitchen," he muttered. "Sarah is upstairs, pulling herself together." "Good," I said. I walked past him into the foyer. The house was cold. It was always cold, but tonight it felt like a crypt. The fresh flowers on the console table looked stiff, as if they were holding their breath. Sarah came down the stairs a moment later. She was wearing a stunning silver gown, but her makeup was a little too heavy, trying to cover the puffiness around her eyes. When she saw me, her lip quivered. "You're actually making us do this," she whispered. I'm giving you a chance to save your home, Sarah, I said. Most people don't get a second chance. It's humiliation, she spat out. It's accountability, I corrected. The doorbell rang. Robert jumped as if he had been shot. He smoothed his hair, took a deep breath, and forced a smile onto his face. It was a rictus of terror. Showtime, he whispered. The door opened, and the vultures descended. First came Mrs. Gable. She was a woman of 70, who wore pearls the size of golf balls and wielded gossip like a scalpel. She walked in with her cane, her eyes darting around the room, looking for dust, for cracks, for scandal. Robert, darling, she cooed, offering a cheek to be kissed. The house looks magnificent. And Sarah, stunning as always. Then she saw me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, thinner and colder. Oh, Linda, she said, I didn't know you were invited. It's a family dinner, Mrs. Gable, I said, standing tall. I am family. Of course, she tittered. I just assumed, well, with your busy schedule, in the garden. The garden sleeps at night, I said. So do the weeds. Next came the prices, a couple who made their money in pharmaceuticals and spent it on judging others. Then Aunt Margaret, who wasn't really an aunt, but a distant cousin who came for the free food. Within 20 minutes, the drawing room was full. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, the air filled with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of crystal, and the subtle, sharp laughter of the elite. I stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling water. I watched them. They had no idea. They thought this was just another Friday night at Oakhaven. They thought Robert was the successful tycoon and Sarah was the glamorous socialite. They thought I was the charity case, the eccentric widow invited out of pity. Robert was circulating, playing the host. But I saw the sweat on his brow. I saw how his hand shook when he refilled Mrs. Gable's glass. I saw how he checked his watch every 30 seconds. Sarah was in the corner, laughing too loudly at a joke Mr. Price made. Her eyes were wide and frantic. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, waiting for the impact. "Linda," a voice said beside me. It was Aunt Margaret. She was holding a plate piled high with shrimp. "I heard about your truck," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Robert told me it broke down again. It must be so hard for you, dear, if you need a little help with groceries." She patted my arm. Her touch was patronizing, heavy, with false sympathy. "My truck is fine, Margaret," I said. "It runs perfectly, unlike some things." She blinked. "Oh, well, that's good. We were just worried. Robert says you're very stubborn about accepting help." "Robert says a lot of things," I said. "Tonight, you might hear him say something different." "What do you mean?" she asked, a gleam of curiosity in her eye. "Just wait for dinner," I said. A waiter appeared and chimed a small silver bell. "Dinner is served," he announced. The crowd moved toward the dining room. It was a slow, elegant migration. Silk rustled against silk. The smell of expensive perfume was overpowering. I waited until everyone had gone in. I took a deep breath. I touched the envelope in my bag one last time. Then I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the grandest china, the gold-rimmed set that had belonged to our grandmother. Candles flickered in silver candelabras. There were 12 seats. Robert sat at the head of the table. Sarah sat at the foot. The guests filled the sides. There was one empty seat, to Robert's right, the seat of honour. Usually they put me near the kitchen door or next to the deaf uncle, but tonight Robert had left the best seat open. I walked over and pulled out the chair. The room went quiet for a moment. Mrs. Gable stared. Mr. Price paused, with his fork halfway to his mouth. Is that your seat, Linda?" Mrs. Gable asked. "Tonight it is," I said. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. I looked at Robert. He was staring at me. His face was pale. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Shall we begin?" I asked softly. Robert cleared his throat. Yes, of course. The first course was served. Lobster bisque. It was rich and creamy, but I doubt Robert or Sarah tasted a drop. They moved their spoons mechanically. The conversation around the table was the usual drivel. The stock market, the new country club fees, who was having an affair with whom. "I heard the Oakhaven Estate is looking into expansion," Mr. Price said, looking at Robert. "I saw some surveyors near the east property line." Robert choked on his soup. He coughed violently, grabbing his napkin. "Expansion?" he wheezed. No expansion, just maintenance." "Maintenance is expensive," Mrs. Gable noted. "But then again, the Sterling legacy has deep pockets, unlike some families who squander their inheritance." She glanced at me. I didn't flinch. I took a sip of water. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "speaking of inheritance and legacies, Robert, didn't you have something you wanted to share with everyone tonight?" The table went silent. The clatter of spoons stopped. 10 pairs of eyes turned to Robert. He froze. He looked at me, pleading silently. "Not yet," his eyes screamed. "Let us eat first. Let us have the wine." I held his gaze. My expression was stone. "Now." "Robert," Mrs. Gable asked, "do you have an announcement? Is it a new venture?" Sarah let out a small strangled sob from the other end of the table. She quickly covered it with a cough. Robert slowly pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. It sounded like a scream. He stood up. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at his guests. These were the people he had spent his life trying to impress. These were the people whose validation he craved like a drug. And now he had to destroy himself in front of them. Robert started. His voice failed him. He cleared his throat and tried again. We have something to say." "We?" Mrs. Gable asked, looking at Sarah. Sarah stood up too. She was shaking visibly now. She couldn't look at anyone. She stared at the centerpiece of white lilies. "Yes," Robert said. He turned his head slowly, painfully, until he was looking down at me. "Linda," he said. "Yes, Robert?" I asked, looking up at him. He closed his eyes for a second. "I want to talk about you." "Go on," I said. "For years," Robert began, his voice trembling, "for years I have told everyone at this table that you were a failure." A gasp went around the room. Mrs. Gable's hand flew to her mouth. "I told you," Robert continued, addressing the guests now, "that Linda was poor, that she was bad with money, that she was an embarrassment to the Sterling name." "Robert, what is this?" Mr. Price asked, confused. "Is this a joke?" "No," Robert said. "It's not a joke. It's a lie." He looked back at me. Tears were welling in his eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of absolute, crushing shame. "The truth is," Robert said, forcing the words out, "Linda is not the failure. I am." The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the candles burning. "I am broke," Robert confessed. "I have mismanaged the estate. I have gambled away the profits. I am in debt up to my eyeballs. And—" He paused. He looked at Sarah. Sarah spoke up, her voice high and thin. "And we tried to steal from her," Sarah said. She was crying openly now. "We tried to trick Linda into signing a mortgage so we could use her credit to save ourselves, because we were too proud to ask for help." "Oh my," Mrs. Gable whispered. "Oh my God." "We mocked her," Robert said, his voice gaining a little strength, fueled by self-loathing. We made fun of her truck, her clothes, her garden. We called her a peasant. But the truth is, she is the only one of us who has any dignity. He turned to me. He bowed his head. I'm sorry, Linda, he said. I'm sorry for every insult. I am sorry for being a terrible brother. I am sorry for judging you by what you wear instead of who you are. You are the only true sterling at this table. Sarah walked around the table. She looked like a ghost. She stood next to Robert. I'm sorry too, Linda, she sobbed. I'm sorry I gave you those old clothes. I'm sorry I called you a loser. You're not a loser. We are. They stood there, heads bowed, waiting for the executioner's axe. The guests were paralysed. This was not the dinner party they expected. This was a public flaying. I sat there for a long moment. I let the words hang in the air. I let the guests absorb the shock. I let Robert and Sarah feel the full weight of their exposure. I looked at Mrs. Gable. She looked from me to Robert, her face pale. She was realising that every nasty rumour she had spread about me was a lie fed to her by the man standing in front of her. I reached into my bag and I pulled out the white envelope. I placed it on the table. I slid it across the white tablecloth until it rested in front of Robert. Accepted, I said quietly. Robert looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He looked like he wanted to fall to his knees. Thank you, he whispered. Sit down, I said. Your soup is getting cold. Robert collapsed into his chair. Sarah stumbled back to hers. The room was silent. No one moved. No one ate. Well, I said, picking up my spoon. Mrs. Gable, you were saying something about the rosemary in the garden. I took a sip of the soup. It was delicious, but as I swallowed, a strange sensation came over me. I looked at Robert. He wasn't relieved. He was staring at the envelope, but his hands were shaking violently. He looked terrified, more terrified than before. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the dining room opened. A man walked in. He wasn't a waiter. He was wearing a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. He looked official, clinical. Robert looked up. His face went from grey to white. Mr. Sterling? The man asked. Not now, Robert hissed, standing up again. Not now. I have the cheque. I have the money right here. He waved the envelope at the man. The man didn't blink. He walked over to the table. He didn't look at the cheque. He looked at Robert with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. I'm afraid it's too late for cheques, Mr. Sterling, the man said. What? Robert dropped the envelope. But the deadline, you said 48 hours. That was for the bank, the man said. But the bank no longer holds your note. What do you mean? Sarah shrieked from the end of the table. As of 5:00 p.m. this evening, the man announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. The distressed debt on the Oakhaven Estate was sold to a third-party private equity firm. They have exercised their right to immediate possession. Possession? Robert stammered. I mean, the house is no longer yours, the man said. You have until Sunday to vacate the premises. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered into the bowl. I stared at the man. I stared at Robert. I had brought the money. I had forced the apology. I had played the game perfectly. But someone else had been playing a bigger game. And now, the cheque on the table, the $250,000, was nothing but a worthless piece of paper. Oakhaven was gone. The silence that followed the lawyer's announcement was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the invisible debris of a life shattering in real time. It felt as though the air pressure in the room had dropped, sucking the oxygen out of our lungs. The lawyer, whose name was Mr. Thorne, a fitting name for a man delivering such news, stood by the head of the table. He was unmoved by the devastation he had just unleashed. He placed a thick manila envelope on the white tablecloth right next to the untouched lobster bisque. The notice to vacate, Thorne said. His voice was dry, like paper rustling. "You have until noon on Sunday. The locks will be changed at 12:01 p.m. Robert stared at the envelope. His hands were still hovering in the air, midway to a gesture of protest that had died in his throat. He looked like a man who had been shot, but hadn't realized he was bleeding yet. "Sunday?" Robert whispered. It was a sound so small it barely reached the centre of the table. "But this is my home. This is the Oakhaven Estate." "It was," Thorne corrected. "It is now the property of the Omni Global Trust. Good evening, Mr. Sterling." With a curt nod, the lawyer turned on his heel and walked out. The heavy click of the dining room doors closing behind him sounded like the lid of a coffin, snapping shut. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then the spell broke. Mrs. Gable was the first to move. She placed her napkin on the table, not neatly, but in a crumpled pile. She pushed her chair back. The screech of wood against wood was agonizingly loud. "Well," she said, her voice was high and tight, "this is most unfortunate." She didn't look at Robert. She didn't look at Sarah. She looked at her husband, Mr. Gable, sending him a silent signal that said, "Get me out of here immediately." "We should go," Mr. Price muttered, standing up abruptly. "It's late, and clearly there are matters to attend to." "But dessert," Sarah squeaked. She was still sitting, gripping the edge of the table. Her face was a mask of smeared mascara and terror. "We have creme brulee. It's your favourite, Mrs. Gable." It was a pathetic, desperate plea. Sarah was trying to cling to the social construct of the dinner party because it was the only reality she knew how to navigate. If the party continued, maybe the eviction wasn't real. Mrs. Gable looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and revulsion. It was the look one gives to a roadkill animal. Sad, but you don't want to get too close. "I've lost my appetite, dear," Mrs. Gable said coldly. "Come, Harold." The exodus began. It wasn't a polite departure. It was an evacuation. The guests didn't say goodbye. They didn't offer condolences. They simply grabbed their purses and their coats and fled. They were terrified that the failure of the Sterling family might be contagious. They wanted to distance themselves from the stench of bankruptcy. I watched them go. I saw Aunt Margaret stuff a handful of breadsticks into her purse before scurrying out. I saw Mr. Price check his phone, probably already texting the news to the rest of the country club. Within 3 minutes, the dining room was empty. Only 3 of us remained. Robert stood at the head of the table. Sarah sat at the foot. And I sat in the middle, the white envelope with the cheque still resting on the tablecloth in front of Robert's empty chair. The cheque for $250,000. Robert looked down at it. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. He stared at the numbers. "It's useless," he croaked. "Robert," Sarah whimpered. "It's useless," he screamed, his voice cracking. He crumpled the cheque in his fist. "Too late. It's too late." He threw the crumpled ball of paper across the room. It hit the portrait of our grandfather hanging above the sideboard and bounced harmlessly to the floor. Robert collapsed into his chair. He put his head in his hands and let out a sound I had never heard from him before. It wasn't a cry, it was a howl. It was the sound of a man who had built his entire identity on a foundation of sand, watching the tide come in. "We did it," he sobbed into his palms. "We apologized. We humiliated ourselves. We told the truth. And for what? For nothing?" Sarah stood up. She walked over to him, her silver dress rustling. She didn't hug him. She started hitting him. She pummeled his shoulders with her small, manicured fists. "You said you had time," she screamed. "You told me we had a week. You said the lawyer was stalling them. You lied, Robert. You lied to me." Robert didn't fight back. He just took the blows, his body rocking back and forth. I tried, he moaned. I thought I could fix it. I thought if we got Linda's money... You lost my house, Oh, Sarah shrieked. Where am I going to go? I have nowhere. I have nothing. Stop it, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their hysteria. They both stopped. Sarah stood panting, her hair wild, her face flushed. Robert looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Stop fighting, I said. It won't bring the house back. I stood up and walked over to where the crumpled cheque lay on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. I smoothed it out against the edge of the table. The paper was wrinkled, the ink slightly smudged from Robert's sweat. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't sorry that they were learning a lesson. I was sorry for the pain. Pain is a necessary teacher, but it is an ugly one. You're sorry? Sarah laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. You have your cottage, Linda. You have your vegetables. You have your simple little life. You don't understand. This house is who we are. That is the problem, Sarah, I said gently. If you are nothing without this house, then you never really owned it. It owned you. Spare me the philosophy, Robert snapped. He wiped his face with a silk napkin, smearing the tears. We are on the street in 36 hours. Do you understand that? We have to move 50 years of history in a weekend. Then we better start, I said. We? Robert looked at me, confused. I'm not going to leave you to do it alone, I said. I'm your sister. Robert stared at me. He looked at the crumpled cheque in my hand, then back at my face. He seemed to be searching for mockery, for an I told you so. He found none. Why? He asked. After everything we did, after we tried to trick you, after we just fell apart. Because you apologized, I said, and because Tom wouldn't let me leave you. I placed the cheque back in my purse. It was void now. The money wasn't needed for the bank, but I had a feeling money would be needed for something else, survival. Go upstairs, I ordered them. Change out of those ridiculous clothes. Put on something you can work in. We have a lot to do. The next 24 hours were a blur of dust, cardboard boxes, and ghosts. We didn't sleep. The adrenaline of disaster kept us moving. The house, usually so silent and imposing, became a chaotic staging ground. We started in the library. Robert couldn't bring himself to touch the books. He stood in the centre of the room, staring at the leather-bound volumes of law and history that our father had collected. He sat right there, Robert whispered, pointing to the leather armchair. He used to smoke his pipe and tell me that one day all this would be my responsibility. So don't drop the torch, Bobby, he said. Robert picked up a heavy crystal paperweight. He turned it over in his hands. I dropped it, he said. I didn't just drop it, I threw it into the river. Pack the books, Robert, I said, handing him a box. Memories don't weigh anything. You can take them with you. The paper is just paper. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. Where am I taking them, Linda? I have a studio apartment in the city that I rent for my guests. It's 400 square feet. These books alone would fill it. Then take the important ones, I said. Choose. That's what life is, choosing what to carry. We worked through the night. The physical labour stripped away the last remnants of their pretences. Robert's tuxedo shirt was stained with dust and sweat. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms that were softer than they should be for a man his age. Sarah had changed into yoga pants and a t-shirt. Without her heels, she looked smaller. Without her makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable. We found things we had forgotten. In the attic, Sarah found a box of our old toys. She pulled out a raggedy doll with one button eye missing. I remember this, she said, her voice trembling. I was 6. I left it out in the rain, and you found it, Linda. You dried it by the fire for me. She looked at me across the dusty attic. You were always fixing things, she said, Why were you always so good, and we were so... You weren't bad, Sarah, I said, taping up a box of winter coats. You were just hungry, hungry for attention, hungry for things. I'm still hungry, she whispered, but now there's nothing to eat. By Saturday afternoon, the house looked like a skeleton. The rugs were rolled up. The paintings were taken off the walls, leaving pale rectangular ghosts on the wallpaper where the sun hadn't faded the colour. The echo in the hallways grew louder with every box we filled. The third-party buyer, this omni-global trust, had sent a team of movers to collect the furniture. Apparently, the sale included the contents of the estate to cover the remaining debt balance. Robert and Sarah were only allowed to take personal effects, clothes, photos, small trinkets. The antique tables, the grand piano, the silver. It all stayed. It was a second humiliation. I watched as the movers, rough men in blue uniforms, hoisted the dining table, the same table where we had sat the night before, and carried it out the front door. Robert stood by the window, watching his heritage be loaded into a truck. That table, he murmured. Great-grandfather brought it from England. It survived 2 wars. It's just wood, Robert, I said, handing him a cup of coffee. It was instant coffee, made with tap water. The espresso machine had already been packed by the movers. It's not just wood, he snapped, then caught himself. He sighed. I know. It's just... I feel like I'm being erased. If I don't have these things, who am I? I'm just a middle-aged man with bad credit and no skills. That's a start, I said. The truth is a good place to start building. He looked at me. For the first time in decades, he really looked at me. Not as a prop, not as a nuisance, but as a person. How did you do it? He asked. When Tom died. You lost everything too. Your future, your dreams. I didn't lose everything, I said. I had the memories. I had the lessons he taught me. And I had myself. Tom didn't take my hands with him. I could still work. I could still plant seeds. I don't know how to plant seeds, Robert said bleakly. I only know how to harvest. Then you'll learn, I said. Saturday night fell. The house was empty. We sat on the floor of the living room. The furniture was gone. We ate pizza from a box I had ordered. It was the first time pizza had been eaten in the Oakhaven drawing room. The atmosphere was strange. It wasn't the frantic panic of the night before. It was a dull, aching exhaustion. Where will we go tomorrow? Sarah asked. She was picking at a pepperoni slice. I can't go to the studio with Robert. We'll kill each other in an hour. You can come to the cottage, I said. They both looked up. What? Sarah asked. My cottage, I said. It's small. You'll have to sleep on the pull-out couch, and there is only one bathroom, but it's warm, and it's free. You would take us in? Robert asked. After we told you to go to a shelter? Yes, I said. Robert put his pizza down. He looked away, blinking rapidly. I don't deserve it, he whispered. No, you don't, I agreed. But that's what family is. It's not about what you deserve. It's about who catches you when you fall. I can't, Sarah said, shaking her head. I can't live in that little place. What will I tell people? That I'm living on my sister's couch? Tell them whatever you want, I said. Or tell them the truth, that you are starting over. Sarah looked around the empty, dark room. The shadows stretched long across the floor. It's scary, she admitted. It should be, I said. We finished the meal in silence. I lay awake that night on the floor, using a rolled-up coat as a pillow. Robert and Sarah were sleeping in their old rooms, on mattresses on the floor. I listened to the house. It was groaning. Old houses make noise, but tonight Oakhaven sounded like it was crying. It was saying goodbye. I thought about the lawyer, Mr. Thorne. I thought about the Omni Global Trust. I knew the name. Of course I knew the name. I had signed the incorporation papers for Omni Global Trust 3 years ago. It was a shell company I used for high-risk venture capital. I was the buyer. I was the one who had sent Mr. Thorne. I was the one who had ordered the movers to strip the house. A wave of guilt washed over me. It was sharp and cold. Was I being too hard? Was this torture? I listened to Robert snoring in the room above. It was a restless, jagged snore. If I had given them the cheque, they would have paid the bank. They would have kept the house. And in 6 months, Robert would have been back to his old arrogance. He would have told himself that he fixed it, that he charmed me into giving the money. He would have learned nothing. The cancer of his pride would have remained, and eventually it would have killed him. No. The house had to go. The identity had to die. They had to hit the bottom. They had to feel the cold concrete of reality against their skin. Only then could they appreciate the warmth of a blanket. I turned over on the hard floor, the wood pressed into my hip. "Forgive me, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm burning the village to save the people." Sunday morning, 11:55 a.m. We stood on the front steps. The truck with their personal boxes was idling in the driveway. The sun was shining, which felt cruel. The birds were singing, completely indifferent to the tragedy of the Sterling family. Mr. Thorne was there. He checked his watch. 5 minutes, he said. Robert turned to look at the door. He placed his hand on the brass knob. He patted it like one pats the hand of a dying relative. "Goodbye, old girl," he whispered. Sarah was crying silently behind her sunglasses. "I never thought it would end like this," she said. "It's not the end," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "It's just a change of address." "It feels like a funeral," Robert said. He turned away from the door. He looked older than his 58 years. He looked defeated. "Let's go," he said. We walked down the steps. The gravel crunched under our feet. Mr. Thorne stepped up. He took a heavy ring of keys from his pocket. He inserted a key into the lock. The click of the deadbolt sliding home was the loudest sound in the world. It was done. We got into our vehicles. Robert and Sarah got into Robert's car, the last remnant of his luxury, though I knew the lease was up next month. I got into my truck. I watched in the rear-view mirror as we drove away. The great iron gates of Oakhaven swung shut automatically behind us. The house stood on the hill, majestic, empty, and silent. Robert was driving in front of me. I saw his head slump forward against the steering wheel for a moment at the stop sign before he straightened up and turned left, toward my cottage, toward the dirt road, toward the mud. I followed them. They were broken. They were homeless. They were humbled. Phase 1 was complete. The demolition was over. Now the hard work began. Now I had to teach them how to build. The cottage was small. I had always loved its coziness, the way the walls seemed to hug you, the way the fire in the hearth could warm every corner in 10 minutes. But with 3 adults, 2 egos, and 50 years of baggage crammed inside, it didn't feel cozy. It felt like a pressure cooker. The first night was a symphony of discomfort. The pull-out couch in the living room was old. The springs sang a rusty song every time Robert turned over, which was about every 30 seconds. Sarah was on an air mattress I kept for my nieces. It squeaked against the hardwood floor like a mouse in distress. I lay in my bedroom, the door slightly ajar, listening to the sounds of their misery. "It smells like wet dog in here," Sarah whispered loudly around 2 a.m. "Go to sleep, Sarah," Robert groaned. "I can't. There's a draft. And I think I heard something scratching in the wall." "It's probably a rat," Robert muttered. "Fitting company for us now." I smiled into my pillow. It wasn't a rat, it was just the house settling. But let them fear the rats. Fear was a good motivator. Morning broke with a ruthless beam of sunlight hitting the living room window. There were no heavy velvet drapes here to block out the day. I walked into the living room at 6:00 a.m., fully dressed in my work overalls. I stepped over Sarah's sleeping form and kicked the leg of the couch. "Up," I said. "Coffee is on." Robert groaned, pulling the thin quilt over his head. "What time is it?" "Work time," I said. "I don't have a job," he mumbled. "Remember, I'm destitute." "You live here now," I said, pouring myself a mug of black coffee. "And in this house, if you don't work, you don't eat." "I'm not running a hotel, Robert." I went to the kitchen table. I had prepared a list. It was written on the back of an old seed catalogue. Robert and Sarah stumbled into the kitchen 10 minutes later. They looked like refugees from a war zone. Robert's hair was standing up in tufts. Sarah had sleep masks circling her eyes like raccoon markings. "There is only one bathroom," Sarah complained, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "And the water pressure is pathetic. It took me 10 minutes to rinse my hair." "It conserves water," I said. "Sit down." They sat. They looked at the list on the table. "What is this?" Robert asked, squinting. He reached for his reading glasses, then realized he had left them in a box somewhere. "Your assignments," I said. "I can't afford to feed 3 people on my budget without extra hands. The garden is entering peak harvest. I need help." "You want us to farm?" Sarah asked, horrified. She looked at her manicured hands. "Linda, I can't dig holes. I have gel tips." "Then you'll lose them," I said. "Sarah, you're going to the farmer's market with me on Tuesday and Thursday. You're good at talking. You're going to sell the jams and the pickles." "The market?" Sarah gasped. "In the town square. People will see me. Mrs. Gable buys her organic kale there." "Good," I said. "Sell her some. Charge her double. She'll pay it if you compliment her hat." I turned to Robert. "Robert, the fence on the south pasture is rotting, and the firewood needs to be chopped and stacked for winter. That's your job." Robert laughed. It was a bitter, dry bark. "I'm a real estate developer, Linda. I deal in millions of dollars of assets. I don't chop wood." "You were a real estate developer," I corrected him gently. "Now you are a guy sleeping on a lumpy couch who needs breakfast. The axe is in the shed. Breakfast is oatmeal. It's on the stove." I finished my coffee, put on my hat, and walked out the door. I didn't wait to see if they would follow. I knew they would. Hunger is a very persuasive argument. The first 3 days were a disaster. Robert broke the handle of the axe within an hour. He tried to force the blade through a knot in the wood using brute strength instead of physics. I watched from the kitchen window as he threw the broken handle on the ground and kicked the chopping block, hurting his toe. He hopped around on one foot, cursing the wood, the axe, and the universe. I went out, silently handed him a spare handle, and showed him, again, how to read the grain of the wood. "It's not about power, Robert," I said, taking the axe. I swung it easily. The blade split the log with a satisfying thwack. "It's about leverage. You have to find the weak point." "I know about leverage," he snapped, snatching the axe back. "I used to leverage entire city blocks." "And look where that got you," I said. "Try again." Sarah was no better. I put her in charge of labelling the jars of strawberry jam. It was a simple task. Stick the label on straight. She messed up the first dozen. They were crooked, bubbled. "It doesn't matter," she sighed, peeling a label off with her fingernail. "It's just jam. Who cares if the label is straight?" "I care," I said. "My name is on that jar. Linda's Garden. That means quality. If the label is sloppy, they think the jam is sloppy. It's branding, Sarah. You of all people should know that." She looked at the jar. She looked at me. "You have a brand?" she asked, skepticism dripping from her voice. "I have a reputation," I said, "which is worth more than a brand." Do it again. By Wednesday night, the cottage was filled with a sullen silence. Their muscles ached. Their egos were bruised. They ate the simple vegetable stew I made with ravenous hunger, wiping the bowls clean with bread, but they didn't speak. They were in the anger phase of grief. They hated me. They hated the cottage. They hated the dirt under their fingernails that wouldn't wash out, but they were sleeping. Robert didn't toss and turn that night. Physical exhaustion is a powerful sedative. He passed out on the couch at 8:30 p.m., snoring deeply. For the first time, his face looked relaxed. The lines of stress that had etched themselves into his forehead during the foreclosure were smoothing out. Thursday was market day. We loaded the truck at 4 a.m. The stars were still out. The air was cold. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, wearing a hoodie pulled low over her face and oversized sunglasses. You look like you're robbing a bank, I said, putting the truck into gear. I'm incognito, she muttered. If anyone takes a picture of me selling beets, I'll die. I'll literally die. You won't die, I said. You might even make a sale. The market was bustling. It was a world Robert and Sarah had only ever seen from a distance or through the lens of a quaint Instagram photo. Up close, it was noisy, chaotic, and fiercely competitive. I set up our stall. The red checkered tablecloth, the pyramids of jars, the baskets of fresh tomatoes, peppers, and zucchini. Okay, I said to Sarah, stand here, smile. If they ask about the jam, tell them it's an old family recipe. Low sugar, high fruit content. Fine, she grumped. For the first hour, she stood behind the table like a sullen teenager. She crossed her arms. She looked at her phone, which had no signal. Customers walked past, sensing her negative energy. You're scaring them away, I whispered. You're a salesperson, Sarah. Sell. I sell lifestyles, she hissed. I sell aspiration. I don't sell condiments. Just then, a woman approached the stall. It was Mrs. Higgins, our old housekeeper from Oakhaven. My heart stopped for a second. Mrs. Higgins had been let go by the new owners, my management team, with a generous severance package, but seeing her here was a risk. Miss Linda, Mrs. Higgins beamed, her face breaking into a warm smile. I heard you were here. She looked at Sarah. Sarah froze. She tried to shrink inside her hoodie. Miss Sarah, Mrs. Higgins asked gently. Sarah slowly took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were wet. The shame was palpable, to be seen by the help, working as the help. Hello, Mrs. Higgins, Sarah whispered. It's good to see you working, Mrs. Higgins said. No judgment in her voice, only kindness. Your grandmother used to make jam just like this. She told me once that the secret was a pinch of cinnamon. Cinnamon? Sarah asked, blinking. Yes, in the strawberry, just a pinch. Does this have it? Sarah looked at the jar. She looked at me. I nodded. Yes, Sarah said, her voice gaining a little strength. Yes, it does. It's the family recipe. Miss Higgins bought 3 jars. She handed Sarah a $20 bill. Keep the change, dear, Miss Higgins said. You look like you're doing a good job. When Mrs. Higgins walked away, Sarah stood there, holding the money. She looked at the bill. It wasn't a digital transfer. It wasn't a credit card alert. It was real, physical money earned by a transaction she had completed. Something shifted in her posture. She stood up a little straighter. She didn't laugh at me, Sarah said softly. Why would she? I asked. Work is honourable, Sarah. 10 minutes later, a hipster couple walked up. They looked at the tomatoes. Are these heirloom? The man asked. Sarah jumped in before I could speak. They are, she said, her voice finding its old socialite cadence, but grounded in something new. These are Cherokee purples. They have a smoky, sweet flavour, much better than the watery things you get at the supermarket. And see this scarring? That proves they're grown in real soil, not hydroponic solution. They're authentic. She used the word authentic like a weapon. The hipster couple was mesmerised. "We'll take £4, the man said. I watched Sarah weigh the tomatoes. She struggled a bit with the scale, but she figured it out. She took their money. She smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. She looked at me. I upsold them, she whispered. I told them the ugly ones taste better. They do, I smiled. Good job. While we were at the market, Robert was alone at the cottage. I had left him with a list of chores: fix the gate hinge, water the seedlings in the greenhouse, and stack the wood he had chopped badly the day before. But Robert had a different plan. He had walked into town. He had put on his one remaining suit, the navy blue one that still had a faint stain of wine on the lapel from the last dinner. He had walked 3 miles to the office of his old business partner, Greg. Greg and Robert had done deals together for 20 years. They were golf buddies. They had toasted at each other's weddings. Robert walked into the glass-fronted office building. The receptionist, a young girl who didn't know him, stopped him. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Greg Miller," Robert said, adjusting his tie. "Tell him Robert Sterling is here." He waited. He expected Greg to come bounding out, to slap him on the back, to offer him a drink and maybe a consulting position to help him get back on his feet. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the receptionist looked up. She looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Miller says he's in a meeting," she said. "I'll wait," Robert said. "It's important." "He says he's going to be in meetings all day," she said, her voice dropping. "And he said there is nothing he can do for you regarding the Oakhaven situation, and please don't come back without an appointment." Robert stood there. The lobby was air-conditioned, but he felt a cold sweat breaking out on his back. "He won't see me?" Robert asked. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. She looked at his shoes. They were muddy from the walk. She looked at his suit. It was wrinkled. He wasn't Robert Sterling, the tycoon. He was a vagrant in a cheap suit. Robert turned and walked out. He walked past the country club. He saw his old friends on the patio drinking iced tea. He saw Mr. Price laughing. He saw them checking their phones. He realised, with a clarity that hit him like a physical blow, that he wasn't missed. The world hadn't stopped because Robert Sterling fell. The water had just closed over his head, and the ripples were already gone. He walked the 3 miles back to the cottage. The heat was oppressive. His feet blistered in his dress shoes. When he got back, the cottage was empty. Sarah and I were still at the market. Robert went into the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. He saw an old man, a fool. He took off the suit. He threw it in the trash can. He put on his dirty jeans and the flannel shirt I had given him. He went out to the woodpile. He picked up the axe. This time he didn't try to fight the wood. He remembered what I said. Look for the weak point. He stared at the log. He saw the crack in the grain. He breathed out. He swung. Crack. The log split perfectly in 2. He set up another one. Crack. He worked for hours. He worked until his shirt was soaked with sweat. He worked until his hands bled. He worked until the rage in his chest, the rage at Greg, at the bank, at his father, at himself, flowed out of his arms and into the wood. When I drove the truck up the lane at 5 p.m, I saw a neat stack of firewood against the wall. It was 4 feet high. Robert Fay was sitting on a stump, his head in his hands. I got out of the truck. Sarah hopped out, chattering about her sales figures. I walked over to Robert. I saw the raw blisters on his hands. I saw the pile of wood. "You got it done," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red but dry. "Greg wouldn't see me," he said. His voice was flat. He had the receptionist send me away. I'm sorry, I said. Greg was a fair-weather friend, Robert. You know that. They all were, he said. I have no friends, Linda. I have no network. I have nothing. You have firewood, I said, pointing to the stack. That will keep us warm for a month. That's not nothing. That's survival. He looked at the wood. He nodded slowly. I split it right, he said. I found the grain. I see that, I said. Come inside. I'll bandage your hands. That night, the atmosphere in the cottage changed. It wasn't happy. It was still cramped. It still smelled of damp wool and old timber. But the resentment had cooled into something else. Exhaustion, yes, but also a strange, quiet camaraderie. Sarah cooked dinner. It was just pasta with tomato sauce, using the ugly tomatoes she couldn't sell, but she seasoned it carefully. I put a pinch of cinnamon in it, she joked weakly, like Grandma. Robert ate 3 bowls. He ate with his bandaged hands, wincing slightly when he held the fork. The wood is stacked, he said to the room. The fence? I'll do the fence tomorrow. Good, I said. We need the fence fixed before the deer eat the lettuce. I can sell the lettuce, Sarah said. The hipster guy asked if we had mesclun mix. I told him we would have it next week. Then we better plant some mesclun, I said. We were planning. We were functioning. We were a unit. Later that night, I went to my room. I locked the door. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I had a secure connection to the surveillance system at Oakhaven. I brought up the camera feeds. The house was dark. The driveway was empty. The moonlight cast long ghostly shadows across the lawn. It looked majestic and lonely. I had an email in my inbox. It was from the property management firm acting on behalf of Omni Global Trust. Subject: urgent. Structural assessment of Oakhaven Estate. I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Sterling, acting as director, our engineering team has completed the initial survey of the Oakhaven main structure. The damage to the east wing foundation is more severe than anticipated. There is significant water intrusion and rot in the load-bearing beams. Cost of repair is estimated at $1.2 million. If not addressed within 60 days, the county may condemn the structure as unsafe. Please advise on how you wish to proceed. Demolition is an option. I stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated my face. Demolition, my father's library, the room where I was born, the staircase where Sarah took her prom photos, the dining room where Robert had apologised. Condemned. I had the money. My portfolio could cover the 1.2 million, but it would be a huge hit. It would take almost everything liquid I had available. It would put my own financial security at risk. I looked at the door of my bedroom. I listened to the silence of the cottage. Robert and Sarah were finally learning the value of $1. They were learning that a jar of jam represents hours of labour and a stack of wood represents survival. If I fixed Oakhaven now, if I poured my fortune into that money pit, would I be saving the legacy or just preserving a mausoleum? And more importantly, if I spent the money, I would be vulnerable. If anything went wrong with the markets, we would all be destitute, real destitute, not just living in a cottage destitute. I closed the laptop. I had a secret. I owned the house they mourned, but now that house was threatening to swallow me too. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The moonlight caught the white paint of the new fence posts Robert would fix tomorrow. I can't tell them, I whispered. Not yet. If they know I have the money, they'll stop working. They'll wait for me to save them again. But the clock was ticking. 60 days. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there thinking about rot. Rot in the beams. Rot in the soul. And how expensive it is to fix both. 3 weeks passed, seed. Time at the farm wasn't measured in hours or minutes, but by the length of shadows and the ache in one's muscles. We had fallen into a rhythm, a harsh, brutal, but stable rhythm. Robert no longer wore suits. He wore old jeans I had bought him from a thrift store and a worn flannel shirt. His hands, once soft like a pianist's, were now calloused and rough. The blisters had broken, healed, and turned into skin as tough as oak. He had finished fixing the fence. Not only fixed, he had reinforced it. He had recalculated the stress angles of the posts, drawing diagrams on the ground with a dry stick, applying the engineering knowledge he had forgotten since college to create the straightest, sturdiest fence in the county. 30-degree incline, he muttered as he hammered a post. Force is evenly distributed. A hurricane won't knock it down. Sarah had changed too. She no longer complained about her nails or her skin. She found a new battleground, social media. But this time, she wasn't taking photos of herself. She took photos of carrots still clinging to the dirt. She filmed videos of Robert splitting wood, sweat pouring down his back. She wrote captions, not about glamour, but about the journey back to the earth. Her Instagram account, once flooded with meaningless tea parties, had become a local phenomenon. The Fallen Socialite, that was the name she gave her series of posts. People liked it. They liked the authenticity. They liked seeing a rich person struggle in the mud and find joy in it. Online orders started pouring in. Strawberry jams, pickled cucumbers, heirloom tomatoes. Linda, Sarah said at Friday dinner, her eyes glued to her phone. We need to increase cucumber production. I just secured a contract with 3 restaurants in the city. They want our ugly cucumbers. We don't have enough land to plant more, I said, ladling soup into a bowl. Then we rent land, Robert said. He put down the newspaper. Old man Miller's field next door is fallow. I spoke to him. He agreed to rent it cheap if I fixed the roof on his storage barn. I paused, my spoon midway to my mouth. You spoke to Mr. Miller? I asked. Mr. Miller was a grumpy old farmer who had chased Robert off his property 10 years ago for blocking his driveway. Yeah, Robert shrugged. We talked about wood. He liked how I stacked the firewood. He said a man who stacks wood straight has an organised mind. I looked at my siblings. They were discussing. They were calculating. Not to deceive anyone, not to incur debt, but to work. I should have been happy, but I couldn't smile. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. Another email from the property management company. Alert. Material costs for Oakhaven repairs increased by 15%. Need immediate transfer of $50,000 to continue reinforcing the Eastern Foundation. $50,000. I had sold off my technology portfolio last week. I had liquidated government bonds yesterday. My cash was running low. Saving Oakhaven was draining my blood drop by drop. I stood up, feeling a wave of faintness. I'm going to bed early, I said. Aren't you going to finish your soup? Sarah asked, noticing my bowl was still full. You've lost weight, Linda. I ate while I was cooking, I lied. I went into my room and closed the door. I leaned against it, gasping for air. The faint chest pain returned, a sharp warning. I was carrying a secret that weighed 1,000 pounds, and my legs were starting to buckle. The next day was brutally hot. August sun beat down on the valley like a burning wool blanket. We were in the field. The tomato harvest was at its peak. Ripe red tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, needing to be picked immediately before they spoiled. Hurry up, Robert called out. He was carrying 2 full baskets, moving with brisk efficiency. The forecast calls for a thunderstorm this afternoon. We have to get everything into the warehouse. I was in the middle row. bent double. Sweat poured into my eyes, stinging them. "Linda, are you okay?" Sarah called from the next row. "Your face is very red." "I'm fine," I panted. I reached out to pick a tomato, but my fingers wouldn't obey. They were numb. The world suddenly tilted. The blue sky spun. The loud buzzing of the cicadas turned into a deep ringing in my ears. "Linda!" I heard Sarah scream, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. My knees hit the ground. Then my shoulder hit the row, crushing ripe tomatoes. The smell of squashed tomato pulp rushed into my nose, sweet and metallic. Darkness descended, swift and absolute. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic. A cold, white light hit my eyes. I blinked, trying to focus. I was lying on a narrow, hard bed. The steady beep of machinery sounded beside me. The hospital. I tried to sit up, but a hand pressed gently on my shoulder, easing me back down. "Stay still," Robert's voice said. His voice was low, but shaky. I turned my head. Robert was sitting in a plastic chair next to the bed. He was still wearing his dirty gardening clothes. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. Sarah was standing by the window, her back turned, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. What happened?" I asked. My voice was hoarse. "Exhaustion," Robert said. He gripped my hand. His calloused, rough hand enveloped mine. "The doctor said you have severe malnutrition, dehydration, anemia, and chronic stress." Sarah turned around. Her eyes were swollen. "You haven't been eating," Sarah sobbed. "The doctor said your nutritional levels are extremely low. Why? Why didn't you eat?" I looked away. "I did eat. You gave it to us," Robert said. His voice was choked with emotion. "For 3 weeks. I noticed the soup pot was always low before you got your own bowl. You bought meat for us, and you ate bread and vegetable water. Why?" "Because I'm the oldest," I whispered. "And because money is a little tight." "Tight?" Sarah walked closer, grasping my other hand. "Linda, you have a whole garden. You have savings. You were going to buy our house back. Why would you let yourself starve?" I remained silent. I couldn't tell them where the money had gone. I couldn't tell them that my savings were lying in bags of cement and steel beams at Oakhaven. "I'm sorry," I said. Robert bowed his head onto our clasped hands. His shoulders shook. For the first time in decades, I saw him cry for me, not for himself. "You're an idiot," he whispered. "You are the biggest idiot in the world. You took care of us, 2 useless parasites, until you collapsed. And what did we do? We complained about our aching backs and demanded chicken." "You worked hard," I soothed. "Not hard enough." Robert lifted his head. His eyes were burning, a fire I had never seen before, the fire of absolute resolve. "Things are going to change, Linda." "How?" "You are going to rest," Sarah declared. She wiped her tears. "You are going to stay in bed. You are going to read books. You are going to watch TV. Robert and I will handle the rest." "But the harvest." "Robert called Mr. Miller," Sarah said, "and he called his nephews. We're paying them in produce. They're finishing the tomatoes." "And the hospital bill?" I worried. "I sold the watch," Robert said flatly. I gasped. The Rolex. The gold watch our father had given him for graduation. The watch he swore he would never take off, even to swim. "Robert, that was Dad's keepsake," I choked out. "It's just metal," Robert said, looking down at his bare wrist, where the faint indentation of the strap still remained. "It doesn't measure the time that matters. The time that matters is now. It's you being alive." I closed my eyes. Hot tears spilled onto my pillow. Tom was right. Break the bone so it can set straight. They were broken, and they were healing beautifully. I was in the hospital for 3 days. When I was discharged, my old pickup truck had been washed clean. Inside, it even smelled faintly of pine air freshener, a luxury I never bought. When we arrived home, I saw a new stone path leading from the gate to the front door. The stones were carefully laid, level and smooth. "Robert did it," Sarah whispered. "He did it overnight, so you wouldn't trip." I was gently led into my bedroom. The bed had fresh sheets, smelling of sunshine. On the bedside table was a vase of wildflowers picked from the garden. "Rest," Robert commanded, pulling the quilt over me. "Yes, don't even think about getting up until tomorrow." They left the room, closing the door gently. I heard them moving around in the kitchen, the clatter of cutlery, Sarah's small giggle when Robert dropped something. It sounded like family. I sank into a deep sleep, the best sleep I had had in months. I didn't dream of Oakhaven. I dreamed of this small, crowded, warm cottage. The next morning, I woke up at 9 a.m. The sun was high. I felt much better. The chest pain was gone. I walked out to the living room. The house was empty. There was a note on the table. "We went to town to deliver the goods. Chicken porridge is in the rice cooker. Do not go into the garden. Love. S and R." I smiled, scooping out a bowl of the porridge. It was a little salty, but good. I walked out to the front porch, breathing the clean air. Just then, a white postal truck pulled into the lane. The mailman, a young man named Tim, waved. "Hello, Miss Linda," Tim called out. "Glad to see you up. Heard you had a scare." "I'm fine, Tim. Thank you," I said, walking to the gate. "Certified mail for you," Tim said, handing me a signature pad. I signed. He gave me a large, stiff envelope. Tim drove off. I looked at the envelope. The return address corner had a debossed blue-black logo. Omni Global Trust. My heart gave a heavy thump. This was the monthly progress report. Or maybe a new bill. It should have been sent to my secure email, but perhaps because the $50,000 payment was delayed while I was hospitalized, they sent a hard copy. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a stack of documents, clipped to a red-inked invoice. Notice of past due payment. Project. Oakhaven Estate. Restoration item. Termite treatment and load-bearing beam reinforcement. Amount due immediately. $52,400. Addressee, Ms. Linda Sterling, sole proprietor. I sighed. I would have to call the bank, leverage this very cottage to get the cash. I had no other choice. I was about to go inside to hide the letter when I heard the sound of an engine. Robert and Sarah were back. I panicked. I tried to stuff the envelope into my jacket pocket, but the stiff, oversized paper wouldn't fit. The truck skidded to a stop in the yard. Robert jumped out, his face beaming. "Linda, you're up," he called loudly. "You have to see this. Sarah sold everything. We sold out." He ran toward me, holding a wad of cash. Sarah followed, carrying empty baskets. "What are you hiding?" Robert asked as he approached, seeing me fumbling with the envelope behind my back. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just junk mail. Insurance advertisement." "Insurance?" Robert frowned. "Let me see. You need better health coverage after that hospital stay." "No need, Robert." I backed away. But Robert was quicker. Or perhaps I was still weak. He gently but firmly took the envelope from my hand. "Let me take care of it," he said. "Don't worry about paperwork." He looked at the envelope. His smile vanished. He looked at the Omni Global Trust logo. He looked at the text, Project, Oakhaven Estate Restoration. And he saw the boldest line, Addressee, Ms. Linda Sterling, sole proprietor. Time stood still. The bird song in the garden suddenly sounded deafening. Sarah walked up, her smile also fading as she saw Robert's expression. "What is it, Rob?" Sarah asked. Robert didn't answer. He pulled out the paper inside. He read it. His eyes widened, scanning the lines of text quickly. His hand began to shake. The paper rustled loudly. He looked up at me. His gaze wasn't anger. It was total disbelief, as if his entire worldview had just been flipped again. "Linda," he whispered, his voice catching. Is this real?" "Robert, let me explain," I stammered, reaching out my hand. "You're omni-global?" he asked, his voice a little louder. You bought Oakhaven?" Sarah let out a small shriek, dropping her basket. "What?" Robert looked at the invoice. $52,000, he read. "Beam reinforcement. You're fixing the house? You're fixing Oakhaven?" He looked at me, then at the small cottage behind me, and then back at me. The truth was clicking into place in his mind like Lego blocks. "You had the money," he said. "You had all that money. You bought back my bad debt. You evicted us from the house, the very house you owned." "I did it to save you," I cried, tears welling up. "Robert, Sarah, try to understand. If I had given you the money, you would have squandered it. You would never have changed. But—" Robert shook his head like a drunk man. "You let us sleep on the floor. You let us work like slaves, all while you are a millionaire." "I worked too," I shot back. "I slept on the floor. I never used that money for myself. It was Tom's legacy. I used it to protect this family." "Protect?" Sarah stepped forward, snatching the paper from Robert's hand. She looked at the number. "And you let yourself become malnourished because you had to pay to fix the damn roof." She looked at me with horror. "You would rather starve to save those wooden walls than tell us the truth?" Sarah asked. "I didn't want you to be dependent," I said. Robert took a step back. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "I thought you were cruel when you made us apologize," he said, his voice shaking. "But I accepted it because I thought you were right. I thought you were strict when you made us work, but I was grateful because I felt useful." He swallowed hard. "But this, Linda, this isn't a lesson. This is manipulation. You played with our lives like pieces on a chessboard." "It wasn't manipulation," I yelled. "It was love. Tough love. Love doesn't lie," Robert said. His voice was ice cold, colder than the day he had dismissed me at the dinner party. "Look at you. You almost died from exhaustion. You lied about being poor. You sacrificed your own health to maintain a deception." He threw the paper to the ground. "I sold Dad's watch to pay your hospital bill," he said, his voice cracking, "because I thought you needed me. I thought for the first time in my life I was the big brother who could protect his little sister. But it turns out you never needed me. You have an empire." "Robert, I need you." I stepped forward to grab his arm. The last 3 weeks were the happiest time of my life, because we were a family. He pulled his arm away. "A family built on a stage play," he said. "I don't know who you are anymore, Linda. You are not the simple gardener. You're a master actress." He turned his back. "Come on, Sarah," he said. "Go where?" Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," Robert said, "but I can't stay here. Not in the house of someone who doesn't trust us." Robert walked straight to my truck. He retrieved his small bag of clothes, throwing it over his shoulder. Then he started walking toward the gate. Sarah looked at me. She looked at the paper on the ground, then at the small cottage, and then at Robert's retreating back. "You taught me how to sell, Linda," she said softly, "but you didn't sell me the truth." She ran to catch up with Robert. I stood rooted to the spot. The Omni Global Trust invoice lay at my feet, flapping softly in the breeze. I had won. I had bought Oakhaven. I had taught them the lesson of labour. But I had miscalculated one variable: self-respect. I had rebuilt their self-respect by making them work. And now That very self-respect made it impossible for them to accept being deceived. I watched the two small figures disappear behind the weeping willows. I was alone again, rich and utterly isolated. The silence in the cottage was different now. Before, it was a peaceful silence, the kind that settles over a library or a forest at dawn. Now, it was a hollow, aching silence. It was the silence of a house that had held life and lost it. I stood in the driveway for a long time after they disappeared down the lane. The dust from their footsteps had settled. The birds had resumed their singing, oblivious to the fact that my world had just cracked open. The Omni Global Trust letter was still in my hand. The paper was crumpled where I had gripped it too tight. $52,000. It was just a number. A collection of digits. It was less than the value of the portfolio I had liquidated last month. It was less than the price of the cars Robert used to drive. But it was the cost of my relationship with my brother and sister. I walked back into the house. The kitchen was exactly as they had left it. The pot of chicken porridge was still warm on the stove. There were 3 bowls set out on the table. 3 spoons. I sat down at the table. I looked at the empty chair where Robert had sat, bandaged hands clutching his coffee mug. I looked at the spot where Sarah had stood, laughing about selling ugly tomatoes. I ruined it, I whispered to the empty room. I had tried to be the architect of their redemption. I thought I could design their lives like I designed a garden bed. I thought if I pruned their arrogance and watered their humility, they would grow into the people I wanted them to be. But people are not plants. You cannot force them to grow in the shape you want, and you certainly cannot lie to them about the sunlight and the rain. I ate a spoonful of the porridge. It tasted like ash. I spent the next 2 days in a fugue state. I went through the motions. I watered the garden because the plants needed water. I fed Buster because he needed food, but I didn't feel anything. I was a robot operating on a backup battery. I tried to call Robert's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried to call Sarah. Her mailbox was full. They didn't want to be found. On the 3rd morning, I drove to the bank. I sat in Mr. Henderson's office again. "Another withdrawal, Linda?" he asked, his eyebrows raised. He looked concerned. "You are depleting your liquid reserves dangerously fast. If the market takes a dip..." "It doesn't matter, Arthur," I said. "Just wire the money." I gave him the account number for the construction firm working on Oakhaven. 52,400, I said, and mark it as final payment. "Final?" he asked. "For now," I said. I left the bank. I had saved the physical structure of Oakhaven. The beams would be reinforced, the rot would be stopped, the house would stand for another 100 years, but who would live in it? I drove out to the estate. The gates opened automatically for my truck now, recognizing the transponder I had installed. I drove up the winding driveway, past the manicured lawns that Robert used to be so proud of. The house loomed over me. It was magnificent. It was a masterpiece of stone and glass. I parked and walked to the front door. I used the key that Robert had handed over to Mr. Thorne with such sorrow. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale. It smelled of dust and abandoned dreams. I walked through the foyer, my boots echoing on the marble. I went into the dining room. The table was gone, sold to pay debts. The room looked vast and empty without it. I stood in the spot where I had sat during that last dinner. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear Robert's voice, trembling with shame as he apologized. I could hear Sarah's sob. They had been real that night. For the first time in their lives, they had been real. And I had rewarded their honesty with a deception. I walked to the library. The bookshelves were empty. I sat on the floor in the center of the room. Tom I whispered. I messed up. I pulled the acorn out of my pocket, the same acorn I had held the night of the party. It was smooth now, polished by the worry of my thumb rubbing against it. You can't buy dignity, Lynn, Tom's voice echoed in my memory, and you can't buy love. You can only earn it. I had bought the house. I had bought the debt. I had bought the control. But I hadn't earned their trust. I had demanded it as collateral. I realized then what I had to do. I couldn't just give them the house back. That would be another handout. That would be returning to the old dynamic where I was the saviour and they were the dependents, and I couldn't keep the house for myself. It was a mausoleum. It was too big, too cold, too full of ghosts. The house was the problem. Oakhaven was the anchor dragging us all down. Robert and Sarah were obsessed with it as a status symbol. I was obsessed with it as a burden of legacy. We needed to change what the house was. I stood up. My knees popped. I took out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello?" a voice answered. It was gruff, busy. "Mr. Miller?" I said. "It's Linda Sterling." "Linda," the old farmer grunted. "I wondered if you'd call. Your brother is on my roof." My heart leapt. "He is?" "Aye, and the sister is in the barn, washing carrots. They showed up 3 days ago, said they needed work, said they didn't want charity, just a place to sleep in the hayloft and a wage." Are they okay?" I asked, gripping the phone tight. "They're working," Miller said. "The boy, Robert, he's slow, but he's careful. He fixed a leak I've had for 5 years. He told me he learned how to find the grain of the wood." I smiled through my tears. "And Sarah?" "She's organising my inventory," Miller chuckled dryly. "She told me my system was archaic, and she's putting everything into a spreadsheet on her phone. She's annoying, but she's efficient." "Mr. Miller," I said, "I need to come see them." "Come on then," he said. "But Linda." "Yes?" "Don't bring your checkbook," he warned. "They told me about the money." "They aren't angry about the money, girl. They are angry because they felt like fools. Don't try to buy them off." "I won't," I said. "I'm bringing something else." "What?" "A resignation letter," I said. I drove to Miller's farm. It was only 2 miles down the road from my cottage, but it felt like a different world. It was a working farm, messy, loud, smelling of manure and diesel. I parked near the main barn. I saw him immediately. Robert was up on the roof of the hay barn. He was wearing a tool belt that looked too big for him. He was hammering a shingle into place. Bang, bang, bang. The rhythm was steady. Sarah was sitting on a crate near the barn door, scrubbing mud off a pile of potatoes. She wore a bandana over her hair and oversized rubber gloves. I stepped out of the truck. Buster, who I had brought with me, barked. Sarah looked up. Robert stopped hammering. The silence returned. Sarah put the potato down. She peeled off the rubber gloves slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just watched me. Robert climbed down the ladder. I was gambling with the only thing that mattered. I drove away, leaving the key sitting on the fence post, shining in the sun. That night, the cottage was quiet again. I sat by the fire, Buster at my feet. I didn't cook stew. I didn't have the energy. I ate a piece of toast and waited. 7:00 p.m. passed. 8:00 p.m. passed. They weren't coming. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Maybe I had pushed them too far. Maybe the wound was too deep. Maybe they preferred the hard, honest labour of Mr. Miller's farm to the complicated mess of being a Sterling. At 9:00 p.m. I heard a car. It wasn't Robert's smooth sedan, which was gone. It wasn't a taxi. It sounded like a tractor or an old truck. I went to the window. Mr. Miller's battered farm truck was idling in my driveway. The passenger door opened. Sarah jumped out. Then Robert. They didn't come to the door. They walked to the back of the truck and pulled something out. It was a large roll of paper. Blueprint paper. Or maybe just butcher paper. They walked up the path. I opened the door before they knocked. Robert was holding the roll of paper. Sarah was holding a notebook. They looked tired, dirty, and electrified. "We have a plan," Robert said. He didn't say hello. He walked right past me into the living room and cleared the magazines off the coffee table. "It's crazy," Sarah said, following him. "It's absolutely insane, but Mr. Miller said it might work." I closed the door. I walked over to the table. Robert unrolled the paper. It was the back of a large feed sack. On it, drawn in charcoal and marker, was a sketch of Oakhaven. But it wasn't Oakhaven as a home. There were labels, arrows, notes. "Look," Robert said, pointing to the east wing, the part that was rotting. "We don't repair this for living space. It's too expensive. We gut it. We turn it into an open-air pavilion, a greenhouse structure, glass roof." "And the main hall," Sarah tapped the drawing. "It's not a living room. It's a venue. Weddings, corporate retreats, but not just any venue, a teaching venue." "Teaching?" I asked, sitting down. "Yes," Robert said. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "You taught us how to work, Linda. You taught us that dignity comes from your hands. Oakhaven. It shouldn't be a place where rich people hide. It should be a place where people come to learn how to start over." "A vocational academy?" I asked. "In a mansion." "A heritage skills centre," Sarah corrected. "Woodworking, gardening, culinary arts. We use the land, we use the kitchens, we use the library for business classes." "And who runs it?" I asked. Robert straightened up. He looked at Sarah. "We do," he said. "Employees. You hire us, not as family, as managers. You pay us a salary, a fair salary. If we fail, you fire us. If we succeed, the profits go to the Tom and Linda Foundation." I stared at the drawing. It was crude, it was messy, but it was brilliant. It wasn't just saving the house, it was repurposing it. It was taking the symbol of their vanity and turning it into a tool for service. "You want to work for me?" I asked. "No," Robert said firmly. "We want to work for the house. You just happen to hold the deed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key. He placed it on top of the drawing. "We picked it up," he said. I looked at the key. Then I looked at my brother and sister. They weren't the same people who had sat at that dining table a month ago, sneering at my floral dress. They were rougher, they were humbler, and they were finally, truly my partners. "The meeting is at 10 a.m. tomorrow," I said. "Mr. Thorne will be there. We'll be ready," Sarah said. She tapped her notebook. "I have a marketing plan. From ruin to roots. It's going to be huge on TikTok." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest and filled the room. "I bet it will be," I said. "I bet it will be." The morning of the meeting, the sky was a brilliant, hard blue. It was the kind of sky that demanded clarity. I arrived at Oakhaven at 9:45 a.m. Mr. Thorne's sleek grey car was already parked in the driveway. He was leaning against the hood, checking his watch, looking like a man who had better places to be. I parked my truck next to his sedan. The contrast was comical, mud-spattered utility versus polished corporate efficiency. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," Thorne said, straightening his tie. "I assume we are here to sign the liquidation papers. I have the demolition crew on standby for a quote." "Not just yet, Mr. Thorne," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "We have a presentation to hear first." "A presentation?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "From whom? The squirrels?" "From the management team," I said. Just then the sound of an engine chugging up the hill interrupted us. It was Mr. Miller's farm truck again. It groaned and sputtered, backfiring loudly, as it crested the hill. Robert was driving. So I was gambling with the only thing that mattered. I drove away, leaving the key sitting on the fence post, shining in the sun. That night, the cottage was quiet again. I sat by the fire, Buster at my feet. I didn't cook stew. I didn't have the energy. I ate a piece of toast and waited. 7:00 p.m. passed. 8:00 p.m. passed. They weren't coming. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Maybe I had pushed them too far. Maybe the wound was too deep. Maybe they preferred the hard, honest labour of Mr. Miller's farm to the complicated mess of being a sterling. At 9:00 p.m. I heard a car. It wasn't Robert's smooth sedan, which was gone. It wasn't a taxi. It sounded like a tractor or an old truck. I went to the window. Mr. Miller's battered farm truck was idling in my driveway. The passenger door opened. Sarah jumped out, then Robert. They didn't come to the door. They walked to the back of the truck and pulled something out. It was a large roll of paper. Blueprint paper. Or maybe just butcher paper. They walked up the path. I opened the door before they knocked. Robert was holding the roll of paper. Sarah was holding a notebook. They looked tired, dirty, and electrified. "We have a plan," Robert said. He didn't say hello. He walked right past me into the living room and cleared the magazines off the coffee table. "It's crazy," Sarah said, following him. "It's absolutely insane, but Mr. Miller said it might work." I closed the door. I walked over to the table. Robert unrolled the paper. It was the back of a large feed sack. On it, drawn in charcoal and marker, was a sketch of Oakhaven. But it wasn't Oakhaven as a home. There were labels, arrows, notes. "Look," Robert said, pointing to the east wing, the part that was rotting. "We don't repair this for living space. It's too expensive. We gut it. We turn it into an open-air pavilion, a greenhouse structure, glass roof." "And the main hall," Sarah tapped the drawing. "It's not a living room. It's a venue. Weddings, corporate retreats, but not just any venue, a teaching venue." "Teaching?" I asked, sitting down. "Yes," Robert said. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "You taught us how to work, Linda. You taught us that dignity comes from your hands. Oakhaven. It shouldn't be a place where rich people hide. It should be a place where people come to learn how to start over." "A vocational academy?" I asked. "In a mansion?" "A heritage skills centre," Sarah corrected. "Woodworking, gardening, culinary arts. We use the land, we use the kitchens, we use the library for business classes." "And who runs it?" I asked. Robert straightened up. He looked at Sarah. "We do," he said. "Employees. You hire us, not as family, as managers. You pay us a salary, a fair salary. If we fail, you fire us. If we succeed, the profits go to the Tom and Linda Foundation." I stared at the drawing. It was crude, it was messy, but it was brilliant. It wasn't just saving the house, it was repurposing it. It was taking the symbol of their vanity and turning it into a tool for service. "You want to work for me?" I asked. "No," Robert said firmly. "We want to work for the house. You just happen to hold the deed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key. He placed it on top of the drawing. "We picked it up," he said. I looked at the key. Then I looked at my brother and sister. They weren't the same people who had sat at that dining table a month ago, sneering at my floral dress. They were rougher, they were humbler, and they were finally, truly my partners. "The meeting is at 10:00 a.m. tomorrow," I said. "Mr. Thorne will be there." "We'll be ready," Sarah said. She tapped her notebook. "I have a marketing plan. From ruin to roots. It's going to be huge on TikTok." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest and filled the room. "I bet it will be," I said. "I bet it will be." The morning of the meeting, the sky was a brilliant, hard blue. It was the kind of sky that demanded clarity. I arrived at Oakhaven at 9:45 a.m. Mr. Thorne's sleek grey car was already parked in the driveway. He was leaning against the hood, checking his watch, looking like a man who had better places to be. I parked my truck next to his sedan. The contrast was comical. Mud-spattered utility versus polished corporate efficiency. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," Thorne said, straightening his tie. "I assume we are here to sign the liquidation papers. I have the demolition crew on standby for a quote." "Not just yet, Mr. Thorne," I said, grabbing my briefcase. "We have a presentation to hear first." "A presentation?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "From whom?" "The squirrels?" "From the management team," I said. Just then, the sound of an engine chugging up the hill interrupted us. It was Mr. Miller's farm truck again. It groaned and sputtered, backfiring loudly as it crested the hill. Robert was driving. Sarah was in the passenger seat, clutching her notebook like a shield. They parked. They got out. They were not wearing suits. Robert was in clean, dark jeans and a collared work shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his tanned, scarred forearms. Sarah wore a simple linen dress and practical boots. They looked like people who worked for a living. "Mr. Thorne," Robert said, extending a hand. His grip was firm now, calloused. Thorne looked at the hand, then shook it briefly. "Mrs. Sterling," Thorne said coolly, "I thought you had vacated the premises." "We did," Robert said. "We're here to make a bid." "A bid?" Thorne scoffed. "With what capital?" "Last I checked, your assets were zero." "With human capital," Sarah interjected, stepping forward. Her voice didn't waver. "Shall we go inside?" We walked into the main hall. It was empty, echoing, and stripped of furniture. Robert walked to the centre of the room. He didn't look intimidated by the space anymore. He looked at the walls as if he was seeing through them, to the beams and studs underneath. They set up their presentation. It was low-tech, just the drawings on the butcher paper taped to the wall with painter's tape. "Oakhaven is a money pit," Robert started. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to sell us on the history or the grandeur. The East Wing is rotting. The HVAC system is obsolete. To restore it as a residence would cost $2 million. It is a bad investment. Thorne nodded, looking bored. "We know this. That's why we are tearing it down." "But," Sarah stepped in, "the market for experiential learning is growing by 40% annually. People are tired of digital lives. They want to make things. They want to touch dirt. They want to bake bread." She pointed to the drawing. "We propose the Oakhaven Heritage Skills Centre," she said. "We don't fix the East Wing to live in. We strip it to the frame, install industrial glass, and turn it into a year-round greenhouse and botany lab. We turn the carriage house into a wood shop. The main kitchen becomes a culinary school." "And who pays for the conversion?" Thorne asked. "The house pays for itself," Robert said. "We sell the remaining architectural salvage, the marble mantels, the copper piping from the unused wings, to fund the initial renovation. We do the labour ourselves, with a team of apprentices who pay us to learn the trade." "You want to run a construction site where the workers pay you?" Thorne laughed. "That's absurd. It's a trade school," Robert corrected. "I've already spoken to the local vocational college. They need placement sites for their students. They will provide the insurance and the workforce. We provide the site and the master craftsman." "Master craftsman?" Thorne looked at Robert. "You?" "Me," Robert said, "and Mr. Miller, and the head carpenter from the restoration firm who I've been talking to. I'm not the expert yet, but I'm the project manager, and I know every inch of this building." I watched them. I stayed silent. They had done their homework. They had called the college. They had crunched the numbers. And the revenue model? I asked, speaking for the first time. Sarah flipped a page in her notebook. Weekend workshops for city professionals, she said. How to build a chair. Farm-to-table cooking. High ticket price. That funds the scholarship program for the local kids. We create a brand. Oakhaven made. We sell the furniture and the food produced by the students. She looked at me. We don't sell the house, Linda. We sell the values you taught us. Hard work, quality, sustainability. The room was silent. Thorne looked at the drawings. He looked at Robert and Sarah. He tapped his pen against his chin. It's risky, Thorne said. It relies on execution. And frankly, your track record for execution is poor. Our track record for pretending was poor, Robert said. We aren't pretending anymore. Robert turned to me. We aren't asking you to give us the house, he said. We are asking for a 1-year lease, a probationary contract. We draw a salary of minimum wage. All profits go to the renovation fund. If we don't hit the benchmarks in 12 months, you bulldoze it. He looked me in the eye. Let us try to save it, Linda, not for the name, but for the purpose. I looked at Thorne. Thorne shrugged, but I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. The demolition schedule is flexible, Thorne said, and if they cover the carrying costs, it's a low-risk option for the trust. I looked at Robert and Sarah. They were holding their breath. Okay, I said. Sarah let out a squeak of joy. Robert's shoulders dropped 3 inches. But, I raised a finger. Strict terms. Thorne draws up the contract. It's an employment agreement. You report to me monthly, and if I see 1 dime spent on luxury instead of lumber, the deal is off. Agreed, Robert said. And, I added, I want one more thing. What? I want a room, I said. Not to live in, but a small office. I want to watch. I want to see this happen. You can have the library, Sarah smiled. It's going to be the business centre anyway. The contract was signed that afternoon. The transformation of Oakhaven began the next day, and it was nothing like the polished, silent maintenance of the past. It was loud, messy, and alive. Robert wasn't joking about the vocational college. Within a week, a busload of students arrived, tagged kids in neon vests and hard hats, looking at the mansion with wide eyes. Robert met them at the gate. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his tool belt. Listen up, I heard him shout over the wind. This isn't a museum, it's a job site. Respect the wood, respect the tools, and respect each other. Let's get to work. He led them to the east wing. I sat in my makeshift office in the library, watching through the window. I saw Robert showing a young girl how to pry up a rotted floorboard without damaging the joist underneath. He was patient. He used his hands to demonstrate. He laughed when she made a mistake and showed her again. He was a natural teacher. I realized that his arrogance had just been a defense mechanism for his insecurity. Now that he wasn't afraid of failing, he was free to help others succeed. Sarah was a whirlwind in a different way. She took over the kitchens. She contacted local farmers, including the ones she had met at the market, and set up a supply chain. She created a Oakhaven Instagram account documenting the restoration. One video went viral. It was just a clip of Robert sanding an old banister overlaid with Sarah's voiceover talking about stripping away the varnish to find the true grain. It got 2 million views. People started signing up for the workshops before the paint was even dry. 3 months in, we hit our first major crisis. Not a financial one, but a social one. Sarah decided to host a hard hat gala. It was a fundraising dinner to buy new equipment for the woodshop. She invited the entire town, including Mrs. Gable, including the Prices, including all the people who had fled the dinner party that night. Are you sure about this? I asked Sarah, as we set up long trestle tables in the unfinished main hall. The walls were still stripped to the plaster. The lighting was industrial string lights. They need to see, Sarah said, arranging centerpieces made of wood shavings and dried wildflowers. They need to see that we aren't hiding. The night of the gala, the driveway filled up, but this time, alongside the luxury sedans of the country club set, there were pickup trucks from the farmers and beat-up Hondas from the students. I stood by the door, wearing my simple navy dress. Robert stood next to me, wearing a clean shirt and a blazer over his jeans. He didn't try to hide his rough hands. Mrs. Gable arrived. She walked in, clutching her pearls, looking at the exposed lath on the walls with horror. "Oh, my," she sniffed. "It looks unfinished." "It is," Robert said cheerfully. "It's a work in progress, just like us." Mrs. Gable blinked. She didn't know how to respond to honesty. We sat down to dinner. The food was cooked by the culinary students. Hearty vegetable stews, fresh bread, roasted chickens. It wasn't lobster bisque, it was real food. Halfway through the meal, Mr. Price stood up. He had had a few glasses of wine. "So, Robert," he called out, his voice echoing in the hall, "is this the new plan, turning the Sterling estate into a trade school? Isn't it a bit below your station?" The room went quiet. The students looked down at their plates. The farmers looked at Mr. Price with narrowed eyes. Robert stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked calm. "Mr. Price," Robert said, "for 50 years I thought my station was determined by the height of my ceiling and the cost of my wine. I thought I was above people who worked with their hands." He looked around the room. He looked at the students. He looked at me. "But in the last few months," Robert continued, "I've learned that a house that only serves one family is a tomb. A house that serves a community is a home. We aren't lowering our station, Mr. Price. We are finally building a foundation." "Here, here!" Mr. Miller shouted from the back table, raising his glass of cider. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite golf clap applause. It was loud, raucous cheering. The students whistled. Mrs. Gable looked around, bewildered. She saw the genuine joy in the room. She saw Sarah laughing with the baker's daughter. She saw Robert shaking hands with the plumber. She looked at me. "You must be very proud," she said, her voice small. "I am," I said. "I have never been prouder." The months rolled on. Winter came and went. The greenhouse was finished, a gleaming structure of glass and steel where Sarah grew winter greens. The wood shop was humming with the sound of saws and sanders. I found myself spending less time supervising and more time just being there. I would sit in the library, reading, listening to the hum of the house. It wasn't my house anymore, not really. I held the deed, yes, but the spirit of the house belonged to them. One rainy afternoon in March, I was in the library organising some receipts. Robert knocked on the door frame. "Got a minute, boss?" he asked. "Always," I said. He walked in. He looked tired but happy. There was sawdust in his hair. "I found something," he said. "We were opening up the wall in the attic. Behind the chimney breast, we found a box." He placed a dusty tin box on the desk. "It's Dad's," he said. My heart skipped a beat. Our father had been a distant man, stern, focused on the legacy. "Did you open it?" I asked. "Not yet," Robert said. I waited for Sarah. Sarah came running in a moment later, wiping flour off her apron. "What is it?" she asked. "Time capsule, maybe," Robert said. He pried the lid open with a screwdriver. The metal groaned. Inside were papers, old photographs, and a letter. Robert picked up the letter. The paper was yellowed and brittle. "It's addressed to my children," Robert said. He began to read aloud. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and I assume you are fighting over the house. Robert paused. He looked at me with a wry smile. He knew us well. He continued reading. I built this house to be a monument to our family's success, but monuments are heavy things. I fear I've raised you to worship the stone, not the fire within the hearth. Robert, you are too proud. Sarah, you are too vain. And Linda, you are too quiet. I felt a lump in my throat. My hope, the letter went on, is that one day this house will fail you. Yes, I hope it fails. I hope the roof leaks. I hope the money runs out. Because only when the roof leaks will you learn to patch it. Only when the money runs out will you learn to earn it. Do not keep Oakhaven as a museum of my life. Make it a workshop for yours. Robert lowered the paper. His hand was shaking. He knew, Sarah whispered. He knew we were broken. He didn't know, I said softly. He hoped. He hoped we would break so we could be fixed. A workshop for yours, Robert repeated. He looked out the window at the busy courtyard where students were loading a delivery truck with handmade chairs. I guess we finally listened. It took us 40 years, Sarah sniffed, but we got there. Robert looked at me. You were the catalyst, Linda, he said. You were the storm that broke the roof. I was just the gardener, I said. I just pruned the dead wood. The 1-year mark approached. The probationary period was ending. I sat in my cottage the night before the final review. I had the spreadsheets in front of me. The Oakhaven Heritage Skills Centre was profitable. Not wildly profitable. They poured almost everything back into the facility, but it was in the black. They had paid their salaries. They had fixed the East Wing. They had created jobs for 12 people and training for 50 students. Technically, they had met every term of the contract, but I had one more test for them. I drove to the house the next morning. It was a Saturday. The workshops were in full swing. The parking lot was full. I called them into the library. Sit down, I said. They sat. They looked nervous. This was the habit of a lifetime, fearing the judgment day. I have reviewed the numbers, I said. You have met the KPIs. The revenue is stable. The structural repairs are certified. So we can stay, Sarah asked, leaning forward. The lease is up, I said. The contract states that at the end of the year we renegotiate. Okay, Robert said. We can discuss a rent increase. We have the cash flow. I don't want a rent increase, I said. I pulled a document out of my briefcase. I am selling the house, I said. The colour drained from their faces. What? Robert stood up. But we did everything you asked. We saved it. You can't sell it now. I have a buyer, I said calmly. A buyer who knows the property intimately. A buyer who has a vision for the future. Who? Sarah demanded. Some hotel chain? Some tech billionaire? No, I said. The buyers are Robert Sterling and Sarah Sterling. I slid the document across the desk. It was a transfer of deed. Price, $1, Robert read. He looked up at me, stunned. Linda, I don't understand. I bought the debt for $250,000, I said. I spent another $100,000 on the initial stabilization. The house is worth $4 million now, thanks to your work. But I don't want the $4 million, and I don't want to be your landlord anymore. You're giving it to us? Sarah whispered. I'm selling it to you, I corrected. Chen, for $1, and for one condition. What condition? Robert asked. Anything. The condition is that my name is taken off the deed, I said. I want to be free of it. I want to be just Linda. I want to come here for Thanksgiving dinner, not for a board meeting. I want to be your sister, not your boss. Robert looked at the paper. Tears fell onto the legal text. You really trust us? He asked. After everything? I trust the man who built that fence, I said, and I trust the woman who sold those tomatoes. You aren't the people who lost the house anymore. You are the people who earned it. Robert picked up the pen. He didn't hesitate this time. He didn't look for a trap. He signed his name, a strong, clear signature. He handed the pen to Sarah. She signed with a flourish. It was done. It's yours, I said. Don't mess it up. We won't, Robert said. He came around the desk and hugged me. It was a crushing, sawdust-smelling hug. Sarah joined in, smelling of yeast and vanilla. We stood there, the three of us, in our father's library, finally balanced. Now, I said, pulling away. Get back to work. I saw a student using a chisel wrong in the workshop. If he ruins that oak, I'm taking the $1 back. They laughed. They ran out of the room, energized, lighter than air. I stayed behind for a moment. I packed my briefcase. I took the picture of Tom out of my wallet and looked at it. We did it, Tom, I whispered. The bones set straight. I walked out of the library. I walked through the busy hall, past the students, past the noise and the life. I walked out to my truck. I didn't look back at the house as I drove away. I didn't need to. I knew it was standing strong. I drove down the lane, toward my little cottage, toward my garden, toward my dog. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the valley. I was no longer the master architect. I was just Linda. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. 5 years later. The seasons have a way of smoothing out the rough edges of the earth. Rain fills the cracks. Grass covers the scars. Time does the same for families. I was in my garden, kneeling on a foam pad, pruning the hydrangeas. They were blooming in riotous shades of blue and purple this year. My hands were older now. The veins were a little more prominent, the knuckles a little stiffer, but they were still strong. Buster was sleeping in the shade of the porch. He was an old dog now, his muzzle completely white. He didn't chase rabbits anymore, he just watched them with a benevolent indifference. A truck pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a farm truck. It was a delivery van with a logo painted on the side in elegant forest green letters. Oakhaven Heritage Collective Esta 2024. A young man jumped out. He looked to be about 20. He wore a clean uniform and carried a wooden crate. Delivery for Ms. Sterling, he called out cheerfully. I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron. Hello, Marcus, I smiled. Marcus was one of the first students in the Oakhaven program. He had come from the inner city, a kid with a record and a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. Robert had taken him under his wing in the wood shop. Robert sent this, Marcus said, setting the crate down on the porch table. He said it's the prototype for the new line. He wants your approval before they go into production. I told him he doesn't need my approval anymore, I said. You know how he is, Marcus grinned. He says you have the eye of Sauron. Nothing gets past you. I laughed. Tell him I'll look at it. And, Marcus added, reaching into his pocket, Miss Sarah said to give you this. She said if you don't come, she's going to drive down here and drag you by your hair. He handed me a heavy, cream-coloured envelope. Invitation, the 5th anniversary gala and graduation ceremony. Keynote speaker, the Honourable Robert Sterling. Honourable? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He was elected to the town council last month, Marcus reminded me. Landslide victory. Right, I shook my head. I keep forgetting. My brother, the politician. He's a good one, though, Marcus said seriously. He actually fixes things. Anyway, I gotta run. We have a big order for the hotel downtown. See you Saturday, Miss Linda. He hopped back in the van and drove off. I opened the crate. Inside, nestled in wood shavings, was a jewellery box. It wasn't just a box. It was a piece of art. It was made of reclaimed walnut from the old Oakhaven stables. The joinery was seamless, dovetails so tight they looked like they had grown together. The grain was polished to a deep, honeyed lustre. On the bottom, burned into the wood, was a small signature, not Robert's, Marcus T. And below that, the brand, Oakhaven Made. I ran my thumb over the wood. It was warm. It was perfect. Robert hadn't sent it for my approval. He had sent it to show me that the seed had become a tree. Saturday evening, I put on my navy dress, the same one I had worn to the disastrous dinner party 5 years ago. It felt different now. It didn't feel like armour. It just felt like a dress. I drove my truck up the winding lane to Oakhaven. The estate had changed. The manicured, sterile lawns were gone. In their place were terraced vegetable gardens, rows of berry bushes, and an orchard of young apple trees. The air buzzed with bees. The house itself looked different. The ivy had been trimmed back. The stone had been power washed. But the biggest difference was the windows. Every window was lit, not with the cold electric light of a showpiece, but with the warm, chaotic light of activity. Shadows moved behind the glass. I parked in the overflow lot, a converted paddock, and walked to the main entrance. There was no security guard. There was no red carpet, just open doors and the sound of music, a jazz band playing in the foyer. I walked in. The main hall was packed. There were hundreds of people, and it was the most eclectic mix I had ever seen. There were wealthy donors in tuxedos holding glasses of wine. There were farmers in clean work boots holding bottles of beer. There were students in their graduation gowns, canvas aprons embroidered with their names. Linda! Sarah came rushing through the crowd. She looked radiant. She was 57 now, and she had stopped trying to look 30. She wore her hair in a stylish silver bob. Her dress was elegant but sensible. She looked like a woman who ran a business, not a woman who ran from reality. You came, she hugged me. I was about to send the search party. I wouldn't miss it, I said. Where is the councilman? He's in the back, hyperventilating about his speech, Sarah laughed. He's worse than the students. Go say hi. He needs a pep talk. I made my way through the crowd. People nodded to me. Some knew who I was, the founder, but many didn't. To them, I was just another guest. And I liked that. I found Robert in the library. The room was no longer just a library. It was the administrative heart of the centre. The walls were lined with awards, certifications, and photos of graduating classes. Robert was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. He looked distinguished. The grey hair suited him. The lines on his face gave him character. Robert, I said. He stopped. He looked at me and let out a long breath. Linda, thank God. Is my tie straight? Your tie is fine, I said. Why are you nervous? You've given 100 speeches. Not like this, he said. Tonight is special. We paid off the loan, Linda. I stared at him. The renovation loan? All of it, he said. Every penny. As of this morning, the Oakhaven Heritage Collective is debt-free, and we have a surplus. He walked over to the desk, Dad's old desk, and picked up a framed photo. It was the three of us, taken last Christmas, wearing ugly sweaters and laughing. We did it, he whispered. We actually did it. You did it, I corrected. No, he turned to me. I want you on stage tonight, Linda. Absolutely not, I said firmly. This is your night, yours and Sarah's. I am the silent partner, remember? You're too stubborn, he smiled, shaking his head. And you're due on stage in 5 minutes, I said. Go, break a leg. I watched the ceremony from the back of the hall, leaning against a pillar. Robert stood at the podium. He didn't use notes. He spoke from the heart. 5 years ago, he told the crowd, I stood in this room and thought my life was over. I thought losing this house meant I had lost myself. I was defined by what I owned. The room was silent. But a wise woman told me, he looked at the back of the room, finding me in the shadows, that you cannot own a legacy. You can only serve it. Tonight, we celebrate these graduates. They came here with rough hands and unfinished stories. They leave here as craftsmen, as creators. They have learned that the wood doesn't care who your father was. The soil doesn't care about your bank account. It only cares about your effort. The applause was thunderous. I saw Sarah wiping tears from her eyes in the front row. I saw Marcus, the young woodworker, throwing his cap in the air. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Higgins, the old housekeeper. She was retired now, living in Florida, but she had flown back for the party. "Miss Linda," she said, clutching my arm, "your parents, they would be so proud." "Do you think so, Mrs. Higgins?" I asked. "Oh, yes," she nodded. "Your father built the walls, but you built the doors. You let the world in." I looked at the scene before me. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses. It wasn't the sterile, cold Oakhaven of my childhood. It was alive. It was messy. It was real. I slipped out the side door before the speeches ended. I didn't want the applause. I had what I wanted. I walked out into the cool night air. I walked around the side of the house, past the greenhouse, where the night-blooming jasmine was perfuming the air. I walked to the small family cemetery plot at the edge of the woods. There were 4 stones there now. Mother, father, and Tom. I knelt in front of Tom's grave. The grass was neatly trimmed. Robert's doing. "Hey," I whispered. I placed the small acorn I had carried in my pocket for 5 years on top of his headstone. It was just a dry husk now, but it had done its job. It had anchored me. "You were right," I told him. "Money is like water. It brought life." I looked at the stone. Thomas Sterling. Dreamer. Builder. Husband. "I'm done now, Tom," I said. "I finished the project. The family is safe. The house is safe. My signature is on the deed of their hearts, and that's enough." I felt a sudden, profound sense of lightness. The burden I had carried since his death, the need to protect, the need to teach, the need to control, was gone. I stood up. I looked back at the house one last time. It was glowing like a lantern on the hill. I turned and walked to my truck. As I drove down the driveway, leaving the gates of Oakhaven behind, I didn't feel like I was leaving home. I felt like I was going home. To my cottage, to my quiet garden, to my books. My name wasn't on the building. My statue wasn't in the hall. But as I drove, I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were covered in garden soil. I smiled. The architect doesn't live in the building. The architect builds it, ensures it will stand, and then moves on to the next project. Or, in my case, to the next harvest. I rolled down the window and let the night wind blow through my hair. It smelled of earth and rain and freedom.